Apologies for the false start. Good evening and welcome everyone to the Environment and Community Engagement Scrutiny Commission, which is being held in person. My name is Councillor Margie Newins. I am the Chair of the Commission. Before we start the meeting, I have a few housekeeping arrangements to announce. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is at St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are situated off the main reception area. Please switch your phone to silent whilst in the meeting room. The code for accessing the Southwark free Wi-Fi is uppercase F, lowercase r 3 uppercase W, lowercase I, lowercase f, lowercase I, exclamation mark. This meeting is being live streamed to the Southwark Council YouTube channel via the Zoom platform. A recording of the meeting will also be viewable on YouTube after the meeting has ended. May I remind members to raise your hand if you wish to speak, and please wait until I have given you permission to speak before contributing. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. First of all, apologies. I have had apologies from Councillor Ketsia Harper and our co-opted member Lydia Marsden for this evening. Are there any other apologies? No. Right, thank you. So I'd have a confirmation then of voting members, please. Can voting members present in the room, the co-opted members and the scrutiny project manager, please introduce yourselves, and I'll start with the Vice Chair, and if we go round.
Thank you. Councillor Graham Neal, Vice Chair, St George's Ward. Thank you.
Councillor David Watson, Borough and Bankside.
Councillor Sarah King, Champion Hill Ward.
Shalaka Lakshman, Co-opty.
Councillor Reginald Popula, Nunhead and Queen's Road.
Councillor Emily Hickson, London Bridge and West Bermondsey.
Julie Temple, Project Manager for the Commission.
Thank you. And just to confirm, Shalaka Laxman has kindly agreed to join us this evening as a co-opted member, and therefore is not a councillor and therefore not a voting member, just to be clear. Notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There are no urgent items. Moving on to agenda item 3, disclosure of interests and dispensation. Does any member wish to declare any interests or dispensation in respect of any item of business to be considered at the meeting? No, I will take this as a no. The minutes of the meeting held on January the 12th, 2023 will come to the following meeting. As members will recall, it was a very long session and lots of exciting input to put into the meetings, into the minutes. So unfortunately, we will have to wait for that exciting element of the next meeting. Thank you. So moving on to agenda item number 5, we're going to hear from Rebecca Towers, who is the Programme Director at We Walworth, together with Richard Galpin from Pembroke House. Members will have seen a briefing which is enclosed. If you'd like to come forward, please, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Yes, this is agenda item 5.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Thanks. So I'm Richard Galpin. I'm a resident of Woolworth in Southwark. I'm Director of Partnerships at Pembroke House and a member of the We Woolworth team.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Towers. I'm Programme Director at Southwark Council and a member of the We Woolworth team.
So we're just going to give you a very brief overview of the project. The story of this work really begins with the pandemic. And during COVID, what we saw in Woolworth and many other places in the borough was quite a dynamic, despite the hardships, quite a dynamic partnership of council working with local voluntary sector organisations and residents, working together to respond to need on a massive scale. And crucially, we needed to find new ways of working together because the challenges that we faced were things that the council, charities like ours and residents hadn't faced before. As we go forward into the cost of living crisis and beyond, with ever increasing challenges, I think, simply put, we cannot afford to continue with old ways of working. And again, very simply put, brevity for time, We Woolworth is an attempt to find better ways of working together around local issues, working between council, local voluntary sector organisations and residents. So this work is led by Pembroke House and Southwark Council, working together side by side as co-lead partners with a whole lot of other organisations and individuals involved as well. And what we've been developing is a way of working, a methodology to better understand local issues and actually begin working together with working groups of cross-sector teams to take forward the ideas that emerge. So we work together in person, in place, quite keen on that insistence, in person and in place, as a group of residents, practitioners and professionals, including representatives of local and national government, who all bring different skills and experience into the work. And in the past 6 months, in brief, this is what we've done. We've built a way of working and a methodology, drawing on existing skills and experience, but starting from scratch. We are, throughout the project, building our project's reach through working through local networks, but working quite systematically. So through one-to-one conversations, callbacks, phone banking, using translation where needed to expand our reach into different pockets of the community. And we track all of our conversations and engagement. And crucially, we always recruit residents and others to themselves become part of this wider network of engagement. So the wider project structure looks like this. We invite Woolworth residents, government staff and local businesses, organisations to events that we call neighbourhood welcomes. These are events for about 40 or 50 people, which are hosted at the Woolworth Living Room. It's community space in Woolworth. We start with food prepared by a chef from our community cafe, which always helps to set the tone for the event that we're trying to create. And then we go out during that event and speak to people. Crucially, these are open conversations. So we are not attempting at that point to kind of collect data or have very fixed ideas about what the conversation is going to be about. There's always a moment of anxiety when people realise they've come to an event that we're asking them to immediately go out and have these wider conversations. We provide training and a bit of structure around that. To make people feel comfortable in doing that. And every time we've done it, people have come back absolutely buzzing and energised and amazed how open and willing people were to talk, and starting to think about how this way of working could influence their own work. So far we've held 7 of these events with a total of 160 attendees, had approximately 800 one-to-one conversations in the neighbourhood about food and inequality. And through these events, we surface a local issue that we begin working on in a more in-depth way with a working group. So the first issue we worked on was the barbecues in Burgess Park, which emerged as something that local people were really deeply concerned about. And from there, this same mix of residents and local organisations and council people in the working group, working together on a weekly basis as a project group to take a more in-depth look at the underlying issues. That first working group around the barbecues developed a new vision for outdoor eating in Woolworth, which was shaped entirely by the engagement and conversations they had had. And that working group then presented this vision back to residents at a local ward forum and to council cabinet decision makers about a way to take that work forward. That's ongoing, but we're now at the start of our second challenge, which is going to focus on East Street Market. And again, this is something that surfaced through the engagement work. And we found a real local passion and affection for Woolworth's East Street Market. And it's something that people didn't just want to talk about, but wanted to step up and play a role in shaping. So crucially for us, you know, we're entering into this with no preconceived ideas about what the solutions might be for East Street Market, but aware it faces challenges. And we can already see that the openness of this approach is starting to create the space for people to come forward, market traders, other leaders in the community, to step up and play a really active role in the future of their neighbourhood.
Thanks, Richard. So it's quite different. So it's a very different type of project, and we're calling it an emergent, an experimental project. And we've had a really unique opportunity because of the government funding we've been given, and an opportunity to create something new, a new model. And I think that's really what's happening. So where this came from was a realization in Woolworth. There was a collection of 20 local groups called the Woolworth Group, and they came together and they identified that interventions that are really well-meaning, well-intended, are conceived and run in traditional silos at a local level, with the community working at arm's length or very separately from the council, if they are involved at all. The interventions are typically directed at specific cohorts, conditions or social problems, with not enough consideration of the interconnectedness of neighbourhood context. And the outcomes put too little focus on the centrality of relationships and social capital, and how those things really could affect positive change. So that's what they identified. And I love this phrase. A wise friend said to me, "When in fog, hold hands," which I think beautifully summarises our approach and what we've learnt. And we're already demonstrating the power and the potential of cross-sector collaboration, and we're developing the skills that will be needed to meet the challenges of the future. We're modelling council and central government as an enabler and a different kind of partner, maybe one that's more about symbiotic ecosystems where risks and rewards are more fairly distributed. I think it's worth mentioning that our organisations and local residents are all paid to be part of the project, so we've got budget for that, which is really good. We've made a great start. We've still got work to do, obviously, and I think this second challenge is going to be really, really important, because what it does, perhaps more than barbecues and outdoor eating, is touches a lot of different really important and pressing challenges that are being felt by residents and by our teams within the local authority and our departments: the cost of living crisis, thriving neighbourhoods, town centres and high streets. And the future, the future needs to be looked at in those areas. So the work is really emergent, like I said, and there's a lot of long-term assumptions and outcomes, and this kind of work is quite difficult to measure. But because of the funding programme, we've had to take a traditional approach, and we've also taken a non-traditional approach to measuring the impact of the work. So the DULUC funding required us to put together a theory of change, which we did. And that aligns with the funding programme. And it looks at things like to the extent which local and central government are able to develop new ways of working together and in place. And it looks at whether local residents are able to build social capital through their engagement in the work. So that's all really interesting, really important. And that's done with quite traditional research methods. But we're looking at other ways as well of recording our success. So progress stories, individual stories about how people have experienced the project. And we've used some campaigning methods, which has been really interesting, to develop a different way of approaching our engagement. So this is not ever about, it's not a consultation. It doesn't resemble a consultation. It's it's very much an engagement. We're never extracting information. We're saying, come to us with your ideas and yourself and get involved, as opposed to tell us your information. So, and what we do is we record everything we do. So it's entirely transparent. We're working out in the open, and that transparency leads to increased trust, because anyone can access what we're doing. They know what we're planning, when they know what we've done. So we write everything up with week notes, with blogs, with write-ups of events, and they go onto this external website, which should be linked in your pack. And the work is iterative. So all of the feedback and all of that reflection and learning feeds into the work as we go forward. So the East Street Challenge will look a bit different to the Barbecues Challenge because it will be shaped by those who come with their ideas and their experience and all of their contributions. So very quickly and finally, because I know we're short of time, our hope for outcomes for this project are that local people and organisations gain a greater sense of agency and ability to affect change in their local area, that the public sector gains new skills to better connect with and therefore serve communities, and that learning from the projects is embedded within organisational structures, bringing about wider cultural change. And then just really in brief, the learning that we have taken from the project so far, and that because this project is a learning project, so it's all about learning. So our learning is that relationships, reflective practice and learning are the keys to change. That council staff need to have sufficient agency to work in place, in person, and in more responsive and less preconceived ways. Responsive and emergent projects like this one are a way of allowing space for people to get involved in a more equitable way, and that genuine equity requires the examination of personal positional power, and we summarise it as building new tables to sit around rather than inviting people to our ready-made table, and that is us.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to note, actually, for the record, that I attended one of the We Will Wolf engagement sessions in place, which was actually organised together with the ward councillors, and sadly Ketsia is unwell tonight because she's obviously also very much involved in that. Thank you. Do members have any questions, please? Councillor King.
Right, thank you, and that's really interesting overview of what you've been doing. I'm really conscious that it's emergent, so the answer to these questions may not have yet, but it would be interesting to know if that you do have any thoughts. It feels like you talked about it being a learning project, and that it feels like there's huge amounts of opportunity for every participant in it to be learning. But I was wondering if you have any sense at this stage how it could be, what you learn, where else in the council we could be using this type of project to possibly replace other methods that might not be as successful, or whether it, and also where else, I suppose geographically, in want of a better word, we might be able to learn from this to do something similar. Basically, I'm like, can you do it in Champion Hill, please?
Well, we are enthusiasts of this way of working, and we really like it. We think it's amazing, and we've experienced, the joy of coming together with people, local residents, local organisations, and seeing what people can contribute. I suppose this project is made up of different building blocks. So you could look at the different building blocks and apply them to literally everything that the council does. So a more reflective approach would be the first thing that every single team in the council could be doing, and that reflective practice could be looking to, examine how teams are working, and that would be the start. Then there's something about how you invite local people in, and where those opportunities exist in every single team, in every single service, what's going genuinely well and what isn't going so well. And I think there's something about holding a mirror up. So we need to create probably a culture of a feedback loop. So get more feedback and have a bit of an understanding of how other people perceive us. But then when you look at the project and its kind of building blocks, I mean, the mass engagement could be applied to every place in the borough. I do it. I go out myself, and it's really thrilling when you get those good conversations. You might be rejected like 9 times before you get a good one, but it's really exciting to connect with people, and they are surprisingly open. So there's something about going out onto the ground. You could be having conversations about well-being. I mean, I think that would be a really amazing thing to go into communities and say, where do you feel well? Who are you with when you're well? What places do you go to feel well? And just diversify the conversation to be applied to any of the really pressing challenges of our time. So, and I think, well, actually, I would turn to Richard, because you gave me an amazing example today where you said that you know, what you couldn't imagine not doing because of this project.
Was it the Aylesbury kitchen
Yeah.
kind of idea? Yeah, so yeah, just a small example, but there'd been an idea that emerged during COVID for a community kitchen and the need for kind of more kitchen infrastructure to support emerging kind of small businesses and groups who want to do cooking together. And Pembroke House, we thought, you know, that would involve, well, what would you need to build that? And we're thinking in terms of the infrastructure, the building, the facilities, and what other kind of wraparound support and training might you put around that? Having been involved in Woolworth, I now think what you need is mass engagement and a cross-sector working group, because why would you try and start to create a facility for a neighbourhood without actually trying to talk to an awful lot of people? And not only that, is why would you start a project without having different stakeholders actually actively involved in a working group to try and do that? Now, that's a much bigger ask, but I think the potential for sustainability, the potential for something that actually meets what the community needs and actually has enough buy-in from people, different organisations, individuals, residents, it would be a much more, much greater chance of success.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. This sounds like a fantastic project, and I think certainly the councillors, all of the councillors on the panel would empathise and agree with you. The energy and the joy and the surprise and sometimes the sadness that comes out of engaging on these issues on a regular basis and talking to people about what's on their minds and what their concerns are and how we can make it better. So, you know, huge kudos to you for setting this up, and it sounds like it's going incredibly well. So 2 questions. One, you said you set it up during the pandemic. How long does the project run for? Like, what's the time period that this particular project runs until? And then secondly, you've set yourself a target of talking to 80% of people in the neighbourhoods, which again, I'm sure councillors on the panel would agree with as a target for who we should be talking to when we're out engaging with our communities. How are you doing on it? And if you're anywhere close, we'd love some tips.
If I take the second point first.
Go on,
Yeah.
go.
So we did have people come up to us in the first few months saying, "Are you mad? 80%? Like, you need to stop saying that because you're never going to do it." For us, it's what we'd call an organising principle. It's something that keeps us challenging ourselves on who haven't we got in the room, who else do we need to talk to, and the engagement going constantly. I will say we didn't say 80% of Woolworth. We said 80% of a smaller kind of intense. And the reason for doing that was we thought we wanted those conversations to begin to have a life of their own, right? So it's not just, you're not putting yourself at the center of every conversation, but that person then talks to somebody else. Could we create that kind of spiral of kind of energy? We've had 800 conversations. The target is 4,500. So, sorry? 4,000. So we're not going to make that target, but we're comfortable with that kind of failure because it's driven us to the state. You know, it's continued to kind of inform the practice all the way through. Do you want to talk about the timeline?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So the learning, I think it was a kind of a glimmer of what the future could look like was the pandemic, and this is post-pandemic project. So we got the money. So we submitted a delivery plan actually in the full delivery plan in February last year, so a year ago. In fact, yes, just a year ago. And then we got awarded the funding in March. The project started, we got awarded the funding on the 21st of March and the project was meant to start on the 1st of April. So that was quite challenging. And then we're running through to the end of June. So we've extended it slightly. We were meant to finish by the end of March. So absolutely tight timescales, almost impossible to demonstrate change, but absolutely worth doing, because that long-term change won't be measured until years to come, but we feel the changes, we hear the changes. We're hearing the stories of people who are so excited about getting involved. I was telling Richard earlier, we've got 27 people lined up to get involved in the East Street working group, 27, which is amazing actually, as a conversion rate from our 2 events that we've done. So these are people who want to commit 10 weeks and spend 10 weeks, half a day a week with us, to work on this future of a vibrant future for East Street Market, which is exciting.
Thank you. Councillor Papula.
Cheers, Chair. It's a fairly straightforward question. The project sounds absolutely amazing. It might be mine. It's fantastic that solutions come from the bottom rather than it being imposed from the top. But I'm also aware that Walworth is a very diverse community as well. So it would be good to get further information in terms of who actually you're speaking to. Because if you have loads of conversations with the same sorts of people, both in terms of race or in terms of class, well, then you may get a preconceived outcome from those sorts of people. So it would be good if you could speak about that further, and if you may not be hitting certain targets, if a strategy has been conceived to target those sorts of people, so that they are truly involved in the ideas that come out to ensure that Walworth is a fantastic place.
So we don't actually have any specific targets around demographic information, and we don't actually record data because we're not gathering data in that way. But I think it goes back to Richard's point about the 80% ambition. So it's about who we've got in the room, who we've not got in the room, who's talking to who, and we're experiencing diversity in our events and in our working group. So we have many different languages spoken, and we often go around, we have gone around the room and said, say hello in the language that is you'd like to say hello in. I'd say that we're confident that we're experiencing diversity for sure, and it's because that people are having conversations between neighbour to neighbour, community member to community member, that we're able to reach the far corners of the place. And it's also because we're having conversations with people about something that really gets them out of their house and gets them coming to events, because they're setting the agenda. So I think it would have been really concerning to us if we hadn't had anybody representing the Latin American community talking about the barbecues in Burgess Park. We had 2 members of the Latin community on the working group. We had numerous Spanish speakers. So that was really good. Otherwise, I suppose we can only make assumptions about the people that are coming into the room based upon the colour of their skin. But and other things that we probably would not, we would avoid. So what we're saying is that we have reached the far corners of the place because of the way we've approached this, and the diversity of thought and experience that's coming into the visions that are coming out. Richard, anything more on that?
No, just say, I think, visible diversity, as you say, is dangerous. But if you look at the videos online, they kind of speak for themselves. There's the energy. There's that whole mix of people from different backgrounds there. I'm aware that there isn't here today, but mostly residents. When we do these events and speak back to people, it isn't just the project leads doing that. But for various reasons, tonight was not one of the events that we sort of could very easily attract a big crowd to. So I think enough said, probably.
Thank you, Councillor Hickson. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Councillor King, a quick question.
Very quick, it's just a follow up. You talk with real passion and excitement about it, which is not always there in a scrutiny meeting, which is really lovely to hear. I suppose one of the things that would be quite useful to I suppose, have confidence is going to happen next is how do others across the authority understand what worked well and what didn't necessarily work so well out of it? Because it feels like it's so different from how the council engages on certain things like highways issues, for example. Is that how do we embed the learning?
Such an important question. Well, I think we've got green shoots. I think we've seeds are planted and we've got green shoots growing. For example, 2 weeks ago, we had the community engagement voluntary sector commissioning team come to Pembroke Hat to Woolworth Living Room and have a workshop on Wee Woolworth. I recruited a team of change makers at the beginning of the project, and there was an advert that went out to the whole council, and 20 people from across the council said they were interested in getting involved, and it became 10 over time, but people have got really interested and really involved in the project. And those people are change makers. You know, they have had their own learning experience and they will take that with them. I've also been running for some time a community power working group, which has been quite well attended, and we talk about projects like this and others where people share their own ideas, and Nat has been involved with that for some time. So there are lots of people that are working in the authority who are really interested in this type of work. But I think for those green shoots to grow and for them to really sort of affect change, it will take time. It just takes time. And I think we need to be realistic about that, you know, this is a large organisation and, you know, there are lots of areas that this kind of work could touch, and it's just going to take, I think, time of the learning to properly settle in and percolate through.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to very, very quickly, I suppose it's a little bit of a sort of follow on, because obviously the great interest in what you're doing is very much about it being a sort of a clearly successful community engagement project. What do you think the major obstacles, I mean, if you give us a couple of the major obstacles that you've encountered during the project and how you've overcome them, as a very sort of a final sort of, if you can.
For us, for me, one of the interesting things has been getting central government and local authority people into the place. And I really understand it. People have really busy jobs, but it is about that agency to say, I'm going to spend time in a neighbourhood and connect with local people for the sake of the connection, and to see what insight I get through being in the neighbourhood. And I think it would be amazing if everybody, you know, had that sort of space and time. And I think that would be really transformative. What happened in central government to get central government people into the neighbourhood was a senior person had to write out to say, this is a formal learning and development opportunity. And I thought that was really interesting, that becomes actually, you know, it's not a training course. It is genuinely that learning on the job thing. But without, you know, it's been quite difficult for some people to see how a challenge around barbecues in Burgess Park is relevant to their job. But actually, if we talk about the process of getting to the vision, it's relevant to everybody's job. It's not about the barbecues or outdoor eating as much as it is about the journey to that. And I think that journey can be applied to anything. So I think it's probably about us trying, you know, while we still have time, to express continue to talk about that learning and how it could apply in lots of different areas. But I think that has been the main challenge for me.
Yeah, I think if I got into challenges, we'd be here too long. I just wanted to close maybe by just going back to the diversity point, because I felt like I gave quite a defensive answer to that. And obviously it's a scrutiny committee. So, but I wanted to say, actually, I think it's the diversity that makes it work. It's not a like extra. If you don't have that, we wouldn't be talking with this energy. We wouldn't be feeling like, you know, the work had its kind of the legitimacy that it has.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, thank you for coming along to us. Many thanks. So I'm going to move on to item number 6, which is to hear about another example in the Council of Community Engagement. By way of the Chris. So yes, by way of the climate emergency citizens jury, Chris Page, who is the director of climate change and sustainability, will present on the citizens jury with a focus on the community engagement process. Members will have had a briefing. I just wanted to emphasise that we're hearing from Chris later in the meeting as well on the climate finance side, but this part of the meeting is absolutely on community engagement. So if members have questions on the climate side, then we can have those later, but please to ask you to focus on the community engagement elements of the citizens jury. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for inviting me along this evening. As Councillor Nguyen says, I've circulated a briefing on how we did the citizens jury with climate change, which hopefully members have had a chance to look at. I won't go through all of that in detail because I know members will have had a chance to look at it, but if I just draw out a few key points. So what we did, we introduced a citizens jury last year, and the reason we did this was because climate change is a key priority for the council and something that we're taking incredibly seriously. We had done a lot of engagement with residents through a whole range of traditional methods. We had online forums, we went out to community groups, we had pop-up events in parks, we had talking lampposts and all sorts of other things. And that gave us a huge breadth of opinion from residents, but we felt we lacked the depth in terms of consultation. So people gave their initial views and ideas about climate change. But what we were really interested in is when residents had a sustained period of time where they really got to grips with the sort of complexity of the issue, would they say the same things? Would they come to the same conclusions as if they're just giving their opinion based on sort of information they've read about, they've picked up, they've seen on the media and so on? So we thought a climate jury would really help complement the work we've done in terms of consultation and give us real depth. And the way it works is exactly that. You're going out to residents and you're working with a group of residents that you hope, which we know reflects the diversity of the borough. So we select a random sample of homes. We write to people, we ask them if they want to be involved, we give them lots of information, we ask for information back from them about who they are, how old they are, their ethnicity, their age, their interest in climate change, and then we try as tightly as possible to match the responses with the actual demographic makeup of Southwark. So what you hopefully get is a group of 25 people that's a bit of a microcosm of Southwark in terms of the diversity of Southwark. So as close as you can, you're getting a representative group of people. We then worked with them over about 3 or 4 months. They spoke to experts, they got access to all sorts of information, they discussed with each other these issues, and at the end of that come up with a series of recommendations for the council about what they think we should be doing on climate change and what work we should take forward. We were hampered a little bit because of COVID, so a lot of this was done online, whereas I think if you were repeating it, you'd want as much face-to-face as possible to really give participants an opportunity to talk to each other and to sort of quiz experts and so on. But I think for the council, well, certainly from my perspective, it was a really helpful exercise because what we got from residents was some really, really considered views on what we should be doing. The good news for me was most of what they said is stuff that we were either already doing or were thinking of doing. So it really boosted that sort of work that we were doing. But what it also did is it meant that we were able to work with residents on some really difficult issues that we were grappling with and didn't know the answers to. And with climate change, there's a huge amount we don't know how to deal with it. And so getting all those opinions from residents was really, really valuable. It also, I think, challenges the council to be ambitious, that if we go out and consult on our ideas, you get back a response to our ideas. If you go out and effectively give a jury free rein to think how they want and to come up with their own suggestions, you give a real opportunity to push us to see if we're being as ambitious as we could. On something like climate change, I think that was really important. And the final thing I think was really important for us was it also helped us understand where the public were. So if I speak to environmental activists, they will tell me where we should be going as a council. And then if you speak to residents, you say, actually, are you prepared to go to those places? Are you prepared to, give up your car and various other things that we're being lobbied to do? And it helped us really understand where the public were, when they were really well informed, where were the public and where did they land on some of these big issues. So a really, really useful process. As I said, I've outlined in the paper the process we went through, the structure of it, how it was governed and all of that, which I'm happy to answer questions on rather than, I think, probably repeat it all now. But really worthwhile experience, and I think a really useful and interesting model if you're looking at engagement going forward.
Thank you very much, and certainly, I thought the briefing was very helpful in the way it had been established. Do you members have any questions for Chris? Councillor Hickson.
This is brilliantly interesting. I guess I'm interested in what areas do you think, and you kind of touched on it, but I'll ask you to express a bit more. What was the input most useful? Because I assume that your team put in a fair amount of time into the process of this. So you're weighing up as the director of this team, the input, the resource that you're giving to manage this whole process, which I'm sure was quite laborious, versus the output that you're getting in terms of improvement to your plans. And you said that some of that was about the knowledge and the insight that they were bringing, because you want it to be more than the sum of its parts. But if some of that was leading to conclusions you'd already got to, what would you say were the really rich insights that you were able to get out of that, which, even if you had a climate team of 50 people, you wouldn't get to?
Thank you, Councillor Hickson. I think one of the things that we wanted to do but hadn't done brilliantly was actually ensure that all the things in the action plan were smart. So we had lots of aspiration of things we wanted to do. We had lots of ideas about where we wanted to go, and we knew the end point we had to get to, but we hadn't, in a lot of areas, really worked through the detail of year by year how we were going to do that. And one of the things that came out, I think, quite helpfully from the jury was information on that. So people saying, actually, if you're looking at, I can't give you an example, but if you're looking at decarbonising housing, these are the things we think you should prioritise, and these are the things we think are most important. So it's helped us to think through, I think, what do we focus on first? What are the things we push harder on? And the fact of the things they chose to prioritise was really a reflection back to us on what we should be prioritising, because there is so much to do that, as you say, if we had a team of 100, we wouldn't do it all. So it gave us that sense of firstly, how do we make it smarter? So how do we make sure it's really tangible what we're doing? But then what are the sort of things we should be prioritising?
Thank you. If there are no, are there any further quick questions? And if not, then I will move on. A quick question from Councillor King. Thank you.
You mentioned as an example the piece around using the jury to kind of have that discussion about whether people are willing to change their behaviours. Could you give us some examples of kind of the biggest conflicts that came out of it and how they were dealt with?
Oh, thanks, Councillor. Maybe I should write to the committee. No, I think the way the process worked, we weren't presented with conflicts. So the conflicts have been resolved. So the committee went away, they had those debates, they ultimately voted on what they think was most important. So they came up with a whole range of recommendations. They debated it amongst themselves, they tried to persuade each other, then they voted and said, right, this is where we think you should go. So by the time it came to us, that conflict effectively had gone. So yeah, I'm not sure we were sort of presented with conflict. Is that your question? Or?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, and I suppose I'm thinking about it as a councillor, when you were very often presented with that conflict, particularly on something around climate change. This is a point, there's no question in this. So actually the thing that the jury helped do was remove that conflict.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in some areas, the bit that's been helpful on is, yes, we get lobbied from different sides all the time on what we should and shouldn't be doing. And what it kind of effectively does is say, look, this is where this group of the public think we should be landing. So, I mean, driving for me is always an obvious example. You've got a conflict between people that, everybody wants to reduce congestion in the borough. Air quality is a real issue. People all accept that. But how far are people prepared to go in terms of giving up their car, in terms of really sort of, changing their life in sometimes quite a fundamental way to reduce driving? And I think what the jury does is you have all of those, they have that debate with each other and come up with a series of recommendations, which help us understand, I think, where an informed section of the public are. It won't fix it, and if we do things on driving, it will continue to be controversial. Both sides saying we're not doing enough or we're going too far, but it helps us, give us some sort of clarity, I think, on some of those issues, which is helpful.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, thank you, Chris, and we look forward to hearing from you a little later on in the meeting when we move on to the environment side of this commission. Thank you. So now I'm going to move on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is a discussion of the resident participation framework. The February 2020 Cabinet report on Southwark resident participation framework is enclosed as background. We're going to have a series of presentations and then discussion stroke questions. I'm going to hear first. So there's been an office presentation enclosed as well, addressing 3 main areas, which is an update on the implementation of the resident participation framework, an impact of the regulatory code on participation and the framework, and what good practice in resident participation looks like. The following officers with us tonight, I think virtually. So John McCormack, Tenant and Homeowner Involvement Team Leader, and Nat Stevens, Resident Involvement Manager, is here with us in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And can I first of all say apologies for the fact that I'm not here in person. I had intended to be with you all in person until about 4 o'clock this afternoon, maybe just a little earlier than that. Unfortunately, personal circumstances intervened, so I'm having to join you from home. Thank you for your tolerance and patience in this matter. I need to be able to share my screen. I wonder if the host can let me share my screen.
While we're sorting out that, John, I'd say thank you very much. I know that you've had some trying circumstances to deal with, so very grateful that you were able to join us after all. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Oh, here we are. I promise I'm not going to read from a PowerPoint, you'll be pleased to know. The brief for this particular presentation is actually quite substantial. There's 3 questions in one. There's only 10 minutes to address them. So it's not my intention to read from a script. I'm going to go through what I believe are the key points here and leave it to you to ask questions subsequently if you think there are things that need sort of further, closer examination. I think you've all received a copy of the Word document that gave you basically a summary of all of where we are at in terms of implementing all of the proposals that are in the Cabinet paper. I can't quite remember how many of them there were, but I've given you a sort of State of the Union summary of each of those. And if you want to ask me any questions subsequent to this presentation, you can. What I'm proposing to do right now, however, is to go through with you some of the issues and challenges in the first instance that we've faced in terms of launching the February 2020 Cabinet paper. Some of these issues and challenges are wholly predictable, predictable with hindsight. Is that such a thing? Some of them will obviously make sense to you straight away. Others perhaps will need a little bit more clarification. Essentially, the first thing to say is 2020 will go down as the year of the pandemic. And whilst I appreciate that a lot of people feel that a lot of service providers will use the cloak of the pandemic to hide all sorts of shortcomings and misgivings, etc., etc. The truth of the matter is the pandemic has had a massive impact on resident participation generally, not just the bedding down of the new structures outlined in the 2020 paper. We are still finding, in terms of working with residents and getting our tenants and residents associations, for example, back off the ground, very challenging indeed. In the last 3 years, I mean, it's nearly 3 years now since, well, in fact, it's gone 3 years, isn't it? The 20th of February now. It was the 4th of February 2020 that the Cabinet paper was passed. In the 3 years since, there's been a lot of change. We've been working not against the background of stability. I mean, the pandemic was bad enough. But on top of that, there's been quite a lot of internal change with the Resident Participation Business Unit, formerly part of Communities, going away from housing and modernisation into what was environment and leisure, back into housing and modernisation, but this time within resident services, and different organisational cultures with each of those directorates. In that time too, there's been 3 different managers of the Resident Participation Business Unit, all with their own interpretation of what are the most important objectives for the team, the priorities to work towards. I think one of the biggest challenges, however, has been the legacy of the long-standing structure of the 30-year resident participation structure that the current structure has replaced. Whilst the council seemed to come to the conclusion after the scripting of the Carson report and the research that was undertaken in relation to that, which preceded the resident participation review, there was this sense that there needed to be change, but there was not really any great vision for change. And so the parameters of thinking, I should say, I shouldn't talk in the past tense, the parameters of thinking around what works and what doesn't work in terms of resident participation, still very heavily bounded by the old structures. And so we get a lot of comments and views on the effectiveness or otherwise of the new structures, when really speaking, in 3 years, it's been very, very difficult to bed them in for all sorts of reasons. And also, I think there's been a sense in which people feel that the 30-year structure that predated the existing one, it's tramline thinking in relation to resident participation, including at a very high level within the council, political and administrative. And so there's not necessarily been the level of imagination required, I believe, to make some of the dynamic elements of the resident participation framework actually work. However, what I would say is that because of all the changes that have taken place, organisational leadership changes in particular, there's been a churn in staff, a churn in administrative procedures, with the end result being that a lot of the time people don't know what the policy actually is. And sometimes it falls to me, as indeed it does tonight, a humble team leader, to come and represent the Resident Participation Business Unit. Saying all of that and looking ahead, we have a bill going through Parliament. It's due to be passed any time now, the Social Housing Regulation Bill, which promises to have a big impact on resident participation across the board. Housing associations, councils, a lot of them are going to be impacted by this. And it certainly impacts in many different ways, but certainly in relation to resident participation. And I'll turn to that in a moment. And finally, I would say in terms of key issues for implementation, the council recently commissioned an organisation called the Housing Quality Network to prepare the council for inspection, which is going to happen as a consequence of the passing of the Social Housing Regulation Bill. And that the outcome of that inspection and the report that's been produced also has implications for how we do resident participation. Excuse me. Talking about the impact of regulation, Southwark, like a lot of local authorities, hasn't had external regulation for a number of years. Obviously, you'll remember we used to have the Audit Commission and the Best Value regime. We don't have that anymore. The bonfire of the Quangos under David Cameron got rid of a lot of overseeing bodies and regulatory bodies. But now, after Grenfell, we have regulation coming back. And the council will be expected to meet several different consumer standards, one of which relates specifically to tenant empowerment and involvement. And if we look at that, there's some very prescriptive measures in relation to resident participation. For example, complaints have to be at the centre of resident participation, and there needs to be a process of co-designing a complaints policy to make sure that residents feel comfortable with how it actually works, that it actually serves their interests and as consumers, and as well as, you could say, citizens too. And we have to make sure that complaints feeds directly into our resident participation agenda. We also have to make sure that scrutiny arrangements are in place that are actually resident-led. At the moment, I see the council quite often will take the lead on what feels should be scrutinised within the housing service. We need to be moving more towards resident-led scrutiny, and in fact, there is going to be some work done for us by an external organisation to help us develop our scrutiny proposals. Engagement has to be meaningful. That's to say, we have to be able to evidence the impacts What happened? We're not very good at that in Southwark at the moment, I'm afraid. We don't document very well what's happened as a result of engaging residents in various different ways. And all too often that reflects the fact that the measurement of impact isn't something that's been thought through beforehand, and that's something that needs to be addressed. Also, we're being pushed very much in the direction of having a diversity of engagement options. One size doesn't fit all. The regulator will expect to see us provide a menu of involvement options, and these engagement options need to be, again, co-created with residents. You're going to hear this word co-creation all night long at this rate, but it is a very big feature of the Social Housing Regulation Bill. Residents also need to be involved in landlord communications. Quite how one does that is something that, like a lot of these things, open to interpretation and discussion. But nevertheless, there is a view coming from government, not just a view, but a steer, that we must involve residents in how landlords communicate with residents. I think that, again, that's something that's very heavily driven, I suspect, by Grenfell. Interesting one, this too, there needs to be a recognition of the time taken by residents to help us and reimbursement to them for the time taken. Now, I'm not quite sure at the moment what that reimbursement involves, whether it's cash, whether it's something in kind, but nevertheless, it is something that we've found in our team, whenever there has been any voucher given to people to thank them for their participation, it does actually make a difference. And the issue here about recognition for the time taken by residents is particularly interesting, because we have had some residents recently saying that they spend so much time helping the council that they ought to be paid as consultants. Well, maybe something to think about. And also what we're expected to demonstrate is creative and inclusive resident engagement practices, something that somebody from a housing association in the northeast of England described at the conference I attended last year as capturing the informal. And I like that phrase, and I'm going to look at that in a little bit more detail. So moving on to what does good practice look like? If you look at all the policy statements regarding regulation of social housing, and indeed the social housing white paper that was produced, and the big emphasis in that upon challenging stigmatizing narratives around social housing and social housing residents, again, with a nod to Grenfell, and elevating as it does the importance of resident voice at the heart of policy and practice, I think, and I'm speaking to you personally now rather than speak necessarily as an officer of the council, I'm speaking to you based on my experience of working and studying in this field over many years. One of the things we need to do is clarify the key principles we're talking about, the key concepts. What is voice? How do we know when listening is taking place? How do we know when we're being heard? Are we all talking about the same thing when we talk about the council being a hearing organisation? What is dialogue? How do we really know that we're engaging in dialogue or gestures? And so on and so forth. But the devil is in the detail. We have to examine what we mean by these sorts of things at an organisational level. And I think that residents should be involved with officers in looking through those very concepts as a starting point. We also need to look at ways of how we capture informal feedback from residents. There's an assumption that because residents go to meetings, they haven't got anything to say or they don't really want to get involved. Why should they come to meetings? Why should people always have to be invited into our spaces? Why aren't we actually trying to pick up on messages that in some cases are already out there and that the residents are conveying to us, but we just don't normally see it as resident participation and don't seek to capture it? I've also found down the years too that we're undertaking some in-depth qualitative research with residents, particularly interviews, but also some case studies of projects that they've been involved in and their experiences of being residents of a particular landlord, does open up a rich seam of data, which, yes, it might represent the views of just a few people, but those views, if they're published, start a dialogue amongst other residents as to whether or not there's any mileage to them. It stimulates conversation, discussion, debate, and voice.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to ask you if you can sort of bring your presentation to an end.
I will do.
Sorry,
Fine.
thank you.
Basically, in the conclusion, there's a lot of work to do. There's an awful lot of work to do in relation to resident participation in the borough, and I think we're not alone in that. The work has to be undertaken in partnership with residents, but it does need a steer from the top, strong corporate leadership. But I do believe there are a few quick wins. One of them, and this is something I've elicited from discussions with members, is the provision of induction into resident participation for members. I think that's something that's needed, and judging from the comments that I've heard from members themselves, something they believe is needed. And I think it would also be very interesting too and helpful for some of our residents, particularly those that have an appetite for it, to go on a course that, such as the one that's been undertaken currently by my team on community leadership, to help develop them as reflective practitioners. and thank you for listening, and sorry for going over time.
Thank you very much. Nat Stevens, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Actually, all I could add is I've just joined the team in September, and I'm still trying to review what's been done. And because of my experience of working collaboratively with residents in the past in the community world, where we have had a community power approach towards solving our own problems, and where we've achieved, according to what the residents will say to you, significant amount of projects led by residents through community power model. And we have been able to work with over 700 residents, about 500 young people. And just this Christmas alone, just gone, one resident called Barry Knight, he was so moved by the work that we did that he had contacts, that he brought people from Boyzone, people like Jack from Love Island, and also another star, and the work Erant is doing in Walworth. So trying to make sure that this will come back to the community, work with us, and try and improve resident participation. So that work is ongoing, and that's what I hope to replicate right across the borough in the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering, so unfortunately we seem it would have been great to have a few more sort of tables and microphones here. So I'm sort of thinking how best to manage this. Do members have any questions that they would like to ask to Matt or John? Specifically, what I was going to suggest then would be to move on and hear from residents, and then to have a question and answer session after that, but we're a little bit challenged in terms of the space that we have at any one time. So if I can, could I ask, moving on sort of next down the agenda, the following housing stakeholders are with us tonight to present and contribute. We have Chris Claridge from the Tenants Forum, accompanied by Althea Smith, Joint Chair of Tenants Forum, and Chris Marigini, SGTO, Southwark Group of Tenants Organisations Chair, and Dario Blake, SGTO Vice Chair. Okay, understood. Can I ask you then anyway, if you're speaking to this item, could you come forward and we can hear from you? And also Ina Niguita, who is from the Home Owners Forum. Thank you. Okay, I mean, I certainly would like it'd be great if you could all come forward today. I think what I'm going to say at this point though as well is, so obviously we're very keen to hear from you and delighted that you've been able to join us. I think that we are all conscious, and also from the presentation that we've had from John McCormack just now, that there are certain areas of the resident participation framework which have not been working the way that we would all like them to. I suppose what I'm going to I'd like to shape the narrative a little bit though, to say that, you know, we've had, so members have received obviously the paper that you presented, Chris. Members have also had the papers going back sort of about some of the history of this. So in order to use the time most effectively, I was going to sort of ask not to have a lengthy presentation on the history itself. We understand that it's not working perhaps as well as it should. We want to make it work better. So therefore, we're really focused on trying to come up with positive recommendations. Could I go along, please, and ask you all to introduce yourselves? Thank you. And could you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
My name's Chris Claridge, and I'm here as the tenant representative from Tenants Farm to the Housing Scrutiny Committee, where we feel this item is most appropriate.
So just to be clear, this is the Environment and Community Engagement Scrutiny Commission, and that's why we are hearing this item on community engagement in this meeting. Thank you. Can you go introduce yourselves?
Chris again. I'm the chair of SGTO.
Althea Smith, joint chair of Tenants Forum.
Ina, and I'm the ex-chair of Leaseholders Council. I am the current chair of Northwest Area Forum and the current chair of Leaseholders Forum.
Thank you very much. So I think from what Chris was saying, you decided, Ina, you maybe wanted to speak first, but I mean that's. Yeah,
just 3 minutes to put a background.
So I was going to suggest that if we hear from Ina, from you for 3 minutes, we also hear from Chris for 3 minutes, and sort of take further contributions, and then we can sort of have a discussion with questions as well. Thank you.
I was intending just to give a background for 3 minutes and then let everyone talk, and I would be closing if it's okay with you. Yeah. So. I saw that during the presentation, John didn't manage to capture your attention because it was a long presentation. A question to start with: have you read the history of resident involvement? Are you aware that this is running since 2016? Have you read what happened since 2016 to today? Could you please raise your hand? Because if we are going to address issues, people need to understand.
Sorry, can I ask? So I think the way we're going to work in the meeting is if I could ask you please to present. Members have been provided with the background, so we're going to perhaps ask you to present, and then we'll take questions from members. Thank you.
It's 3 minutes, just a background. What is written in this presentation is that the local area housing forums are poorly attended, and no explanation, it's done. I'm going to give you in 3 minutes a background why they're so poorly attended. So the residents' engagement review started with the Kaizen report in 2017. And the Kaizen report said that the relationship is so broken that something between Southwark and its residents that something has to be done. It's broken to the extent that actually the officers didn't want to come to the meetings, and the residents would scream or shout to the meetings. So therefore, Southwark decided to review the residents' engagement. And it started in 2018 to 2019 with a co-panel. But all of us, Chris here and the Tenants Council and Leaseholder Council, we believe the decision was taken. So we will just use the fit a result which Southwark wanted. The Tenants Council decided to boycott. The Leaseholders Council decided to go ahead because someone has to hold council responsible. And we supported, as Leaseholders Council, we supported the tenants' view that they need their own forum. During 14 meetings, there are more council officers than actually residents. And during those 14 meetings, the council officer had only one thing in mind, is to design exactly what they want, not actually what the residents wanted. We managed to run huge amount of information. We put in those meetings 400 hours plus of work with the presentation. And we managed in the end to bring to the conclusion of the design co-panel that the Tenants Council and Leaseholders, they should have two different forums. What is really important, and this is where the council is failing, that residents' engagement is not a political propaganda and is not a political arena. It's a regulatory requirement. So therefore, the tenants would have their own right under the law, which it is under the housing, social housing regulator, and the leaseholders have different rights which are coming under the Housing Act. So going back, because we manage as a leaseholders to support the tenants' view that there should be two different forums. In the end, in the last meeting, the cabinet member of housing decided to come and completely take over the meeting. and said,
Sorry,
we have
I'm going
to
to intervene. I'm going to intervene and ask you, please. So we're not going to engage in any kind of personal criticism in this meeting, please. So I'm going to intervene and ask you, please, to. So as I said to start, we are really focused here in this meeting. Obviously, we want to. It's good to understand a little bit of the background, but we do want to focus on what we can do constructively to move forward. So I think that's really where I'd like the narrative to go, rather than and please, I would ask you not to focus on individuals. Thank you.
I'm not. I didn't mention any individuals. Just the position name, which is required to mention the position name. But anyway. So it went wrong. We put 2 deputations to the cabinet to make the point that actually the cabinet paper which was presented is more the council view rather than residents' view. So both ourselves and the Tenants' Council, we presented papers to the cabinet in 2019 and in 2020. So we were asked by the leader of the council to give 1 year a chance to make the structure work. So what happened during during those 2 years is that every single forum which was supposed to take place, it was changed in the last meetings, either because they wanted us to participate in other meetings. So to give you an example, one of the area forums, a time which are 5 of them, all of them they are cancelled. People couldn't attend. People were not they're not told. And the meeting was moved as a budget meeting. So if people do not attend the local area forums, is because they have been let in a waiting room with no one telling them what actually is going on. The officers are coming to the meeting without being prepared, or they are not coming at all. They present like 20 pages, they send 20 pages of presentation, and they don't even attend. And the last incident, I'm not going to continue, but technically it's chaos. Every single meeting in a way or another has been chaos. The last event was the Tenants Forum and the Leaseholders Forum, where the terms of reference have not been followed. The meetings had been open, and I had to face 450 people on the Zoom. So I'm going to ask any of you, if you are given only 1 hour notice, to know that you have to chair 450 people. On the tenants, there are 400. On the leaseholders, there are 450 people. How you are going to react? I'm going to let Chris to take over because I just want to give you a background, and I'm going to continue later. I'm going to close. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to.
Can I just sort of urge? So the object of the exercise I'd like to emphasise is, so we understand that there have been problems, and as I say, members have received a lot of the background on this, but the object of the exercise really is to understand ways in which it needs to be, how we can improve it. So I kind of ask you sort of if you could sort of, obviously there is a background there which we've had, but it would be good to understand what you think, where you think the improvements need to be made.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you've had a lot of background from council officers and councillors that have been involved in the process of decimating the tenant participation structure. We haven't been asked a question. In fact, you know, to come here today, I would like to see this room with tenants in it that can actually tell you their experiences. Because the decimation of our structure, which I don't know if any of you, it's lovely because I don't know any of you apart from Reggie, who's my ward councillor, and Graham. We've been around for the last 100 years, so we. So you're you're not aware of the structure that was there previously, and the tenants had a tenant participation structure that was the envy across at least London and across the country. And we had a structure that was a really good structure, but we were all aware that needed repairing slightly, because as time moves on, if the people that were involved at the very beginning, I've been involved in the tenants movement for 40 years now, you know, if you want to move on, you've got to have younger people coming in, younger experiences, so to know how to move on. So what we were begging was, keep the structure we've got, but let's look at it seriously to see how it can be adapted to suit 2023. That wasn't done. What happened was, at the very beginning of COVID, our whole structure was closed down. So there was no participation. This structure, the decimation started with Councillor Cryan, went on to Kieran Williams, went on to Leo Pollock, went back to Stephanie Cryan, and is now with Darren Morell. And we're in a situation, we've been through all that. We've attended hundreds of meetings at Tooley Street. Councillors have pretended to listen to us and take on board, and then gone away and done absolutely nothing. I think it's, you know, for you to say we need to find a way forward under its present form. We've got tenants forums and leaseholder forums where individual people go and they're there as individuals. With the other structure, you had people that were representing their estates. Now, we recognised that not all estates have tenants associations, so that needed to be addressed, that we needed to perhaps look at more modern ways to involve people on our estates. And that was the help we were asking for. We didn't ask for you to close down our structures. We asked you to come along and help us to strengthen them, to make them fit for purpose. And so that's why you've got a group. Taken away the tone, you know, this is a really nice committee, but you're facing really angry people who are just, you know, it sounds emotional, but we've lost sleep over it. We've spent hours and hours. And one of the comments being made now, you know, if tenants get involved, residents get involved, that, you know, reimburse them. I think that is absolute insult. We don't want to be paid. We want to be listened to. We want to be respected. And we want you to be part of, we're trying on a personal level, my own tenants association now, because of COVID, etc. It consists of 3 people. One is 84, I'm 74, and the other one is a freeholder. I want some help to get my tenants association back on the ground, because I know how important it is. It's been my lifetime's work, but there's no one out there to help. You know, we ask local councillors come along and join us, but it's just not up and coming. So what we're asking from this meeting is that our answer is look at the old framework, help us to work it, so that this empowering the community is just, for most of us, quite a farcical expression, because we don't understand what it means, because we're not seeing how that's in action. So you might get more positive things from Chris and Althea, but this is the background as we see it. So we want you to come back to the drawing board. This framework, I personally found quite insulting. A load of bullet points, meaningless bullet points, with one of them actually saying amnesia. Well, we haven't got amnesia. We haven't slept at all. We didn't sleep through any of COVID. In fact, the SGTO had a WhatsApp group that enabled tenants associations to talk to each other. But during COVID, any assistance from the council was just not forthcoming. Everyone was working from home, etc. So we were left to our own devices, and there is just no support. And that's what we need. We need you to look at a proper structure that will fit. Is fit for all, and we're tired of going back on the history, to be honest. You know, it achieves nothing. We want to know how to move forward in a positive way.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can I ask if Chris or Althea want to add anything?
Yeah. Thank you for listening to us. I'd like to add something. It's like going to the government and asking for reparation, and they said, "Oh, we forgot that we were slave owners." Now we're tenants rep. We dedicate a lot of our time to the movement. I had a stroke 4 weeks ago, and I'm here tonight to a presentation on behalf of my tenants, because that's the breadbone of this borough. Now, we had a time where majority of us as tenant reps were tenants, but we find as we go down the line, you've sold off all our property, no objection to Aina, they've bought their properties, but somewhere along the line, you get all these consultants like Kaiser that come in and tell us how to run Southwark. Now, at one stage, we were writing tenants agreement for Scotland, for Yorkshire, for Barnsley. Yeah, we were the flag post of the tenants movement across the UK. We started our tenants conference in Southwark because we didn't want to be going to Yorkshire, Barnsley, Manchester, because we were the dedicated forefront. Just like how we bring police into Southwark, we train them and we move them on. Now, the structure needs revamping because we need to look at the new generation, the young people who are coming, who I'm taking off the street, taking out the police station, because they will be the future tenants. But the way this report is going, you're putting them back on the street because they will be homeless and they will not know what participation is all about because you're not involving them. Now, what we are asking for is to go back around the table, look at the way we used to consult. So you bring a document, for instance, I'm going to go with the rent rise, the rent increase, and you say to the tenant association, which is Acorn, take this document and discuss it with your tenants. Whether there's 2 or there's 10 of you, you discuss it. Then it moves up to the forum, area forum. Then it goes to tenants council. And then all the area forums come together and they'll make a recommendation to the council and say, do we agree with the proposal for your rent increase, or do we have an alternative? And the alternative used to be, we used to have our own barrister, which Southwark used to take away from us sometime, and use the barrister to identify why the rationale for a rent increase. And we used to come to a common unity. That's what the tenants are asking for you to sit around the table, for you to listen to us. Most of you, you're young. You'll have children. You have nieces and nephews. I've got 9 grandchildren. I want something for my grandchildren, to say, oh, grandma did make a milestone, did pave the way for us to discuss, to get around the table and discuss issue about the roof, about the leak, about the radiators not working and so forth. So what we are saying here tonight is that there is a history, and there's a history with everything. We're asking you, read your documents, look at the history. If there's any question, ask us how we are feeling. Ask us the best way. Don't get consultants. I know John mentioned about, say, oh, the tenants need to be paid. Because, yeah, one tenants rep did say that for the information that we have, we should be paid. Because what Southwark tend to do is just pay for consultants and consultants, and they come and tell us, excuse my language, jack shit. Yeah, we can tell you what we need. We live in these properties. We are the tenants. Our children, our grandchildren, our nephew, they are the future tenants. Let us tell us what's best for Southwark. And once we can tell you what's best for Southwark, we can all work together because we got one thing in common, and it's a safe roof. It's a roof that's not leaking. It's a radiator that's not leaking. And that's what we're asking for. And we're asking for the consultation structure to go back what it was. So we can knock doors. The reason why we started with a levy, which now you're trying to say it's not a levy. But you know what? It was a levy. It started 10p. And the reason it started as a levy is to stop us from knocking door, because as tenants rep, we used to get robbed just for the collecting the 10p, because we used to have a book where we have to sign for the 10p. So now we agreed at a stage that you can collect this from our rent, and now it's gone to 550. And then you are saying, oh, you want to be in control of it. No, you can't be in control of it because it's still our money, because it's coming from a rent. So you need to look at it legally, and all your documents, what you've produced, you need to look at it legally, and you need to sit and discuss it with us. Not get your lawyers to write paper to us, send it to us, and then say, oh, this is your legal thing. We can get barristers, and the barrister will not charge us any money, because I've got a list of barristers from criminal to housing barrister that will not charge us for a consultation. So
I'm going to ask, sorry.
I'm going to summarise.
I'd like to summarise, because I also want to hear from Chris, and then we have the Cabinet and Deputy Cabinet Member and other residents also who are going to talk to us, and then move into questions.
So what I'm asking for you to do is to listen and read your papers properly. And if there's any question, you come and you talk to the Federation, you come, you talk to Tenants Council, you come to the meeting, you talk to leaseholder council. Let's have a conference and talk about what the problem is.
Thank you. Can I ask, sorry, because we've used a lot of time, so can I ask you to sort of just add to anything that you'd like to?
I'll just make like a summary. They've said most of the things I wanted to say. I think we started by reminding you what structures that used to be in place, and then sort of being one of the leading boroughs in the country. But all of a sudden, it all went down, which is why if everybody's reiterating that right now, unless we come up with a solution to the problems we have now, one of them being going back to the old system where you have a proper relationship with residents, make them part of decision making. Last year, we attended the TPAS conference. Myself, John McCormack, and Louis, and ourselves. The social housing regulator, Kate Doswell, her keynote speech on that day was about resident involvement, resident participation. By the time we finished that conference, we realized Southwark had been doing it totally wrong. So we opened the conversation saying, I think in time to come, all the councillors who be in housing and even the officers must attend similar conferences to be able to learn, on how to carry out their functions. Right now, I think the summary of it is, we want to go back to the old system. We know that it wasn't perfect, but we should make it as an agenda to go back and see what needs amending in it, not dismantle it and give us what we are currently, having, which is what is creating all this problem. The meeting of 11th of January, 12th January is an example. When Matt called me up on that meeting, I told him that this is not going to work.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call this short, because I have to hear from other people in the room as well. What I'm going to try and do is to juggle a little bit. If you have a very, very quick comment, but I can't take another. So it's
with all due respect, this is 2 years overdue. Yeah. So a little bit consideration has to be given. I'm going to make 2 points.
No, I'm going to ask you.
I would have finished by then.
Right.
If I would have
Can you be very,
finished,
very
I would
quick,
have finished.
Please?
So what Althea make the point, which I made as well, and it's extremely important, is Southwark has to understand that residents' involvement is a regulatory requirement and stop playing as a political agenda and herd us in their direction. This document is saying that the achievement of Southwark is to have 5 people on residents online panel. Do you have any idea how many people we had on the conference?
Ina, I'm going to ask you, please.
400 people on the conferences on tenants.
Ina, and do you think you could finish now, please?
We are 2 years overdue, and this is how we have been treated. This is how we have been treated since 2016, and this is pure demonstration of what it is Southwark commitment to residents' involvement. So how could it be that the biggest achievement of Southwark is to have 500 people online in their online panel in all Southwark, when actually in the old structures, we could get 800 people in only 2 conferences. And we used to have twice a year.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop now, please. I think it's also probably an appropriate moment to point out to the meeting that there has been extensive correspondence between me as the chair of the Scrutiny Commission dealing with community engagement and Chris and Ina, and I think it's appropriate to point out that we could have had a discussion about this, but you did refuse to meet with me. So I think on those terms, that's why it would have been good to have some of this discussion, and therefore we could have focused on how to get the most out of this meeting. I'm going to ask,
to make
please.
the point, I didn't refuse. I questioned the framework. I didn't refuse to meet. I take
so can I ask Councillor Natasha Enin, please, Councillor Darren Merrill, to come forward. Councillor Natasha Enin is the Deputy Cabinet Member for Diversity. Councillor Darren Merrill is the Cabinet Member, and also Melvin Kanu from Alberta TRA, Harry Matthews from Thurlow Lodge TRA, Kadirat Olamide Balogun from Brandon 1 TRA, and Sheila Benjamin from Brandon 3, please. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do, I've really invited the Cabinet Member sort of more to answer questions rather than speak specifically, unless you have any burning issues you would like to draw in. I'd like really to hear from residents. If you wouldn't mind to go along and introduce yourself, and then I'm really happy to have a couple of minutes from you.
So my name's Natasha Enin. As you know, I'm Deputy Cabinet for Diversity, and I've been doing some work on TRAs and looking at ways to engage diverse groups. I've heard a lot of amazing things today in regards to some reasons as to why you want some of the old tenants for the tenants forum structure to be in place. And I've been engaging with lots of different community groups, and unfortunately, many of them didn't even know of that system. It wasn't diverse and it didn't have representation. So one of the things that I looked at is how can we encourage that 46% of the population, that is BME, to be involved? And what does that look like? That 46% of that BME, there's a clear census which sets out who they are, the largest numbers. So we know that we have Italians, Jamaicans, Ghanaians, Nigerians. We know that Southwark is the highest ranking local authority for West Africans, for example, in the borough. Many of them don't speak English and they can't engage with many of the projects in the formats that they're in. And their representatives, unfortunately, are not here, and they're often not in many rooms. So what I've tried to do within my role is to actually go to different places to actually see what community groups are actually doing and how they're representing and where they're representing to. Because it's quite easy to walk into a space like this and speak to people who have a similar understanding to others and present ideas and concepts. But the reality is there's a whole subsection of the Southwark population that is not represented by any of us in this room. And it's about how do we engage them. We know that 61% of those aged 0 to 17 are BME. Of that group, we know African and Caribbean children are the largest, and we know many of their parents have English as a second language. This is statistically. Now, when I began to look at the data, for example, of the TRAs, unfortunately, I haven't received any data on the diversity of the TRAs across the board. I know that 5 TRAs have submitted some data on the diversity of their boards, but that hasn't been forthcoming to date. So in terms of what we've tried to do today, in terms of representation, is to hear from a sample of current people that are involved in TRAs that come from diverse backgrounds. So whoever would like to lead first.
Hi, my name is Sheila Benjamin and I am from Brandon 3 TRA and I'm the chair. On our board, we have not only people from different diverse backgrounds, but we also have different age groups as well. And what we try and do is encourage a wide range so that we've got input from different demographics. Our aim and our focus is to encourage the ethnic residents to be more involved. And our aim is also to make sure that our elderly people, as they get older, and our vulnerable people who are physically impaired and they have disabilities and they have limited options to join us in situations like this, that they're included and that their views are taken on board. So one of the things that we do is we do a lot of work on the ground. We go door to door. We know who our residents are. We talk to them. We get their views. We make sure that those views are fed back. We make sure that we represent them. We make sure that we have opportunities where we have people like Natasha, people like Nat, people like John McCormack, when they're on the ground, that they get to meet them. Michael Score has been down there. Stephanie Cryan has been down there. And we always make sure that they have those opportunities to meet them, be seen, be heard. And I think that's all I'm going to say. But I think we're just doing some great work at the moment. We're moving forward. We're being more involved. We're being more inclusive. And that's something that we're continuously building on. And we hope to just move a lot more forward in the future.
Hi, my name is Harry Matthews, and I'm the chair of Thurlow Lodge TRA. And like you said, we do virtually the same thing. We also have a WhatsApp group that people feed into. As a matter of fact, more people feed onto our WhatsApp group than they do on the face-to-face or coming into actual meetings, because there's a lot of issues on the Aylesbury, and a lot of the residents don't feel that they're being heard from the council. As a matter of fact, I really support what these guys have said here. And that's so through our WhatsApp group and through other means of communication that we have, we try and get everybody either involved or heard, because we believe that as a TRA, we're not just one voice, but we're a bigger voice. So that's it.
Hi everyone, my name is Kudra Olamide Balogun. I'm part of Brandon 1 TRA, and I also have my own small community group, and I also have a WhatsApp group where I communicate with residents. I put activities on during the holidays from the last 2 years. I've done quite a lot of activities and day trips out. What I want from the council really is to, as they've been doing, like Nat Stevens has been on our estates and he's been able to work with families, he's met them one-on-one on several occasions and heard from them. When the council first of all did a first survey, they said they sent it to a lot of the tower blocks. Most of the people did not even know what the survey was or what it was about, if it was for them and what they were supposed to put on the survey. A lot of them were not first, their English is not their first language. They're from the Latin community, they're from the Black ethnic minorities, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone. You know, we have a lot of mixed diverse on the Brandon, and to get them engaged is what I've been doing lately, including my TRAs. So what we do is put on events and get the residents to come out. And sometimes we have our TRA meeting as well, where we encourage the residents to come out. And the last TRA meeting was for heating, where the council officers did not show up. And a lot of the residents were really upset as to reason why there was no apology letter. There was no communication as to whether they were going to turn up or not. And if the council really want the engagement of our community, no show is not acceptable on any level. If you're not going to show up, let us know at least 48 hours in advance so that we know that there is a reason why you're not there. But if we're constantly knocking on the door and you're not going to open, our residents are not going to engage with us. As the small local group TRAs, they would not come to the meetings because they feel like they're not good. The TRAs can't do nothing with the council to get them to come down to their level.
Thank you very much. I don't really know how to manage this process with questions, because ideally we would have wanted, I don't know what to do. How I'm very, very sorry about the setup. This is very far from ideal. So perhaps if Ina and Chris would like to come and sit over here, would that work? And then we can, because I think what would be useful at this stage is to have. Of course, yeah. In fact, also potentially another space here, if someone would like to join in here, because Shalaka is really sort of co-opted for the climate element rather than the community energy, community engagement element of the discussion. I apologise. I'm very sorry, as I say again, that the room hasn't been set up as would have been preferred for this. Do you want to come and sit here? That's great, thanks. Thank you very much. So Councillor Merrill, did you have any sort of particular comments? I'm obviously conscious of time here, and I want to use the the session as efficiently as possible. So, Darren, if you want to come in sort of with a few comments, but then I'm really going to go over to members' questions, and I'd like to, obviously, we've heard from different people. I'd like to emphasise that the message has been there loud and clear, that there is great dissatisfaction with ways in which it's working at the moment. We want to collect sort of positive recommendations, if at all possible, from this in order to try and improve the situation. So that's not said in any way sort of being critical of any individual. We understand where we are at the moment. That's really important, but we do want to try and now sort of think how we can make things better going forward. So if I could ask Councillor Merrill to come in, and then we'll move on to members' questions on that basis. Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to come in. It's been great to hear, you know, from the SGTO, from the residents, etc. This council does have a proud record of residents' participation, resident involvement going forward. I'm not even going to pretend things are perfect, because they're not. Let's be quite straightforward in that. We've had a lot of challenges over the last 2 or 3 years when this framework was put into place, COVID being one of them, a lot of challenges around it. You heard from the SGTO and the members there that weren't participating in that framework and the problems we've had with those. Me and Nat Stevens are at the moment going around, working, speaking to people, work out how we can make sure, and I quite like your terminology, Rebecca, earlier, the diversity of thought, of making sure that we get as many diverse views as we possibly can to shape the framework going forward. It's not let's throw the baby out with the bathwater here, it's how do we look at the framework as it is, where it's not working, where we can improve it, where it is working, we can. And I want to start to have quite a positive conversation going forward. There is history, let's learn from that history, but let's not live in the past, let's move forward.
Thank you very much. And I suppose I'd also sort of call upon members, obviously having a little bit of a taste of the issues here, to think in terms, as a commission, we will be putting forward recommendations in due course when we come to write a report. So also sort of for members to think in terms of framing in your own minds what you've heard tonight, and the idea is sort of to tease out how we can make this work more effectively. Councillor Neil has indicated he wanted to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could get the ball rolling, Natasha, cabinet member, effectively a cabinet member for equality, working with Stephanie Cryan. Is that right? So I don't know, but I understand from this evening that your brief then is to reach out and to include and to make sure that everybody gets a seat at the table. Is that a fair?
When I started it, I said I'm doing work at the moment on TRA specifically, and what we've been looking at is how we can involve residents. in the conversation based on the demographics and understanding that there are some parts of the wards that have a higher number of particular ethnic groups, and how do we get that representation? So I sit directly under Councillor Quyen for the purposes of this project. I am working with Councillor Darren Merrill. I've also been working with the community engagement team and looking at the structures and the different ways in which they engage with communities.
Thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up. So my question was, if you didn't mind, Chair, I wanted to just make sure that I had an understanding. So inevitably, what challenges have thrown up? What successes have you had? But also, what pre-existing organisations have you worked with? Please, that was my question. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Councillor Lennon if you could be sort of, because I'd like to focus in this session on, as much as possible, on the resident participation framework rather than particular cabinet briefs, because that was the object of the exercise. So if you could sort of be brief, thank you.
So with the resident participation framework in particular, one of the things that I've been able to do is to speak to some of the former chairs, many of whom TRA chairs, many of whom are in support of the old system. But as you've heard today already, some of the things that have been thrown up was there were problems. Diversity was an issue, and lots of people being in positions for a number of years. We know that we have a very young population, and that's also been mentioned. And, you know, just looking at innovative ways to get people involved. I learned lots during the early 2017 through a variety of organizations, including SGTO. The dynamics has changed over time. In terms of organizations working with BME community groups, I've looked at Spring Hub, I've been calling schools, I've spoken to colleges, I've been working quite closely with the Southwark youth advisors, and really just trying to get a feel out of what do people want to see, what does co-design look like for different groups? I mean, including the LGBTQ disabled people, for example, and how do we get people together in the same room or in different ways to be involved? Because I think that it's wonderful that we have organizations like SGTO, but at the end of the day, we do need to see a broader spread and a spectrum of people. And it would be good to see a resident participation framework where residents really do participate and have an opportunity to learn how to do that.
Thank you very much. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask loads of questions, and I'm trying not to ask loads of questions. In all of the presentations, there's definitely a very clear call for more from the council, and often that was phrased as more help to organise, more help, definite attendance and people not turning up, which is something that I think bristles all of us around this room when it happens. And when officers aren't in meetings, it can be really, really frustrating. But I was just wondering, for those of you who mentioned you want the council to help you more to do things, could you just say a little bit more on what tangible help that would actually look like? So I think there was obviously there was a huge bit mentioned around young people, around ethnic diversity. I think some people talked about technology and using WhatsApp and different ways of communicating and not turning up at meetings. It's a very wide-ranging question, but it's kind of what is it that the help that you need from us is?
Thank you, Councillor King. I'm going to really sort of ask then if residents want to come in on this. So Chris and Ina and residents on this side as well. If you have any comments you'd like to make in response, thank you.
I would like to respond to that. We seems to be, we're here to talk about more involvement with residents, yeah, and our young people. Now, at the moment, I run the Dane Community Centre. On Friday, I have a Give Back Friday. Give Back Friday, and I'm going to tell you as it is. So I don't keep nothing. I don't hide anything. Give Back Friday is my gangster boys, yeah. So I'm gangster granny on Fridays. So therefore, those are the boys I used to go from the Castle Estate all over Southwark when they used to be locked up in police station from 2006 when I was a councillor right down. I used to go and get them out of jail. Now they've turned their life around. They decide they want to give back to the community. So what they do, they have a soup kitchen that started by Brixton Soup Kitchen. So when we're talking about diversity and talk about young people involved, come to my soup kitchen. Reggie will tell you, Reggie come and he does his surgery once a while. When Reggie does his surgery, these are not white people. These are diverse people, what he's looking at, what he's talking to. They are from Romania, they're from Holland, they're from Poland. They're not just Caribbean, African, we have them there, yes? So when we talk about diversity, we look at the mixture because it's not just West African also suffering on our young people. Right now, I've got someone who is attempted murder in prison, in jail last night, recommended last night. We are the ones, when the parents don't go, we go and talk to the police. So it's about the string of things. There was a Caroline Garden on Asylum Road on a Wednesday night. My gangster boys them deliver 50 meals on a Wednesday night, which is provided by Peckham, Prince of Peckham. White man can't jerk, yes? He cooks the food, my boys pick it up and deliver it. These are the sort of things what we want in our community. They do yoga. I just let them use the oil. I make sure that they're safe there. So these are the sort of things, when we're talking about getting young people involved, getting the community involved, these are the community inspect. On Sunday, we have a church. It's a community church. They don't go to Church of England, they're Pentecostal. They go there and they get people together on the estate. I'll stop.
Thank you. Do residents have further comments they'd like to? I'd sort of to please sort of focus, as if you can, on the question that has been answered by Councillor King and on the resident participation framework matter. Thank you, Chris.
Just a point, really. I mean, as everyone's demonstrating, their tenants associations, they're doing the best that they can to diversify. That's one aspect of tenants associations. A really big, important aspect of our tenants associations is about our living conditions, is about our repairs, is about what's happening on our estates, how we can get the cleaning right, etc., etc. That's, you know, a very important function of the tenants and residents associations, but that's gone by the by. So when councillors make policies about housing, it used to come through the tenants associations so that we could discuss it with people on the estates, so that we could come back with a view about what you're planning for us. We've got the worst repairs service I can ever remember, and that's we know that, you know, but there's no way that we have any input into how that can be improved. So I think you could probably spend a day, and you probably need a day to discuss all these different aspects of a tenants association. You know, what's being said over here is wonderful, and please come and help me on my estate. I would love that sort of help. But, you know, the other really important thing is that we want people, as Althea said earlier, you know, we want people to live in decent housing, because you know, one of the key aspects for people's well-being is that they have a decent roof over their heads. And that is one of the focuses for tenants associations. I don't think you can take it all in tonight. I think there's just so many aspects of what a tenants association and the tenant participation structure should be in order to involve us in those issues with like Councillor Merrill. I think tonight is just, you're going to be just wiping the surface, and it's not going to be that useful. I think you need to have a day to discuss this.
So Chris, I would certainly, I agree that obviously it's a very, very big issue, and I would, even though it wasn't possible to set up a meeting before the meeting tonight, I'd be very happy to set up another one afterwards in order to sort of tease out a little bit of the detail of what's been touched on this evening. But at the moment within this meeting, obviously we are very, very pushed for time given the bulk of this issue. Ina, do you want to come on this? Thanks.
I want to help you because, as Althea said, some of us would know much more about the the Southwark structure than actually you know. So it's a lot of confusion because you have some areas which are talking about involvement and representation, and some other about the housing. So the history is that there are two departments which used to be together. And the name of that department was Community Engagement and Residence Involvement. Now the two departments have been split. One is under the one, therefore you are so confused because you are talking to subjects and they are very different, the subjects. So one part of the department has been moved, which is called community engagement. So you have to stick, we have to stick to words to understand what actually we are talking about. So everything which we're talking about, the engagement, is coming from community engagement part, which is under leisure and the environment. The other part, which is a housing, and the TRAs are involved as well, but you could hear Althea and Chris. It's a resident involvement, which is completely different. It's a different world. It's about how the charges are done, the timing of the repairs. So the regulator, the housing regulator, is extremely strict. So technically, we are in a situation of total confusion because those two departments are together. Now they are split in two different areas and directorships, and we are talking to different subjects. So to reply to your quickly to what the council could be doing different, for the first is to be compliant with itself, because some of the papers are perfectly written. No one implements them. So Southwark is perfectly, it's absolutely perfect in producing a huge amount of paper. They're not following their own paper. So this would be the first recommendation. Follow your own papers, follow the terms of reference. Then attend the meetings, because I heard on the TRAs as well, it's everywhere. The officers wouldn't come, or they would send the papers, 20 pages, and no one would understand that they didn't even bother to call or come. Then the most important, so not only not show officer to attend, follow the rules. And what Chris said, and it's absolutely fundamental, it's about the representation. So in the past, when we go to the past, it's not necessarily about the TRA. So it's not about the structure. Is that through representation, we could change papers. So we had a fundamental importance, as it was, for example, the council, the tenants' rent. And Althea made the point as well. We could change the papers. Now in the new structure, it's not about who is involved in the structure, is that we cannot change any papers. We are used as residents now just for the council to put a PowerPoint presentation and to tick it off. So this is a fundamental miss. But if we go to the regulator, going back to the regulator, because residents' involvement part, not community engagement, and they are not against each other, they have to go in parallel. But scrutiny in the legislator, it's required scrutiny. The scrutiny had been taken away. Scrutiny means that if a paper is put into the cabinet, it has to go with the input from the residents, not asked to be used just to tick the paper. So do not confuse. Exactly. I give you the word.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to just clarify one thing.
So okay, I'm going to move to Councillor Enin, and then if other residents wish to contribute, thank you.
Ina, I think your surmise was very much correct on some points, but I think you may have misheard what the purpose is for the deputy cabinet role, which is to ensure that we create leaders that can actually participate in scrutinizing. What that would look like, we don't know yet, because we're still doing some work. I'm yet, for example, to meet with SGTO. I had plans to meet with SGTO some time back, unfortunately fell through. And there is a lot more work to do to look at how diversity can be achieved, so that those who scrutinized are not representative of one group, and that those voices are heard. And like I said to you, there are a number of people in the areas that have English as a second language. And when we talk about young people, many of their parents may not have English as a first language. So we are trying to be more cooperative on that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask very quickly if you want to come in, because I at this case, right, I don't think I'm going to get in time for another question. So if you could be as quick and try and avoid going back on what's already been said. But I'd like to reference actually answering the question that was asked, please, by Councillor King.
To follow up on what Councillor Natasha said, we've been speaking. SGTO is a platform and a very strategic part of the resident participation. The point is that we spend a lot of time gathering evidences and consulting with residents and make recommendations to the council, and never amounts to anything. People are beginning to get frustrated. That is the point. Most of us work with volunteers. We spend time consulting with residents, and we at least will expect whatever contributions we make, we see it being implemented. But right now, it is not.
Okay, Sheila, did you want to come in as well? Thank you.
So going back to your question, one of the things I would love to see improved, make it easier for us to access grants, funding, especially on, I mean, the process to actually go in for a grant and everything that you've got to submit and the scrutiny around it, but then the timing of the funding when it actually comes through. Last year we did a summer camp, football camp. We had a target of 100 children. We delivered to over 250 children. 80% of those children were from the ethnic category. The other element of it is that we did get approved for the money. We got approved for 2 pots of money, which was 10k each, but none of it came through until after the camp. So we had to use our own TRA money, which meant that we had to put other things on hold. Then it comes through to the evaluation and the monitoring. That took me 40 hours to fulfill before I got my last £2,000. I know about this. I do this as a full-time job. I do campaign work. So this is easy for me. Somebody else, it's not that easy. So that's the first thing, about making it easier for us to access pots of money, making it easy for us to make it accountable rather than 18 pages of monitoring evaluation. And the second thing is about making the content of what we write, what we share with our community, so that it is legible for people with English as a second language. Some of the spoken language here, I have to sit there and I have to kind of like switch into that kind of like politician speak. I used to come to the forums at Tooley Street quite a lot previous to COVID, and it used to annoy me because once you get a certain number of cabinet members around the table, it switches into political speak and you start losing the residents. They're not engaged, you've lost them, and they're literally coming for the food, if you want to put it as bluntly as that. Or they've got, it's quite interesting, but the reality of it is we need to bring it back to plain English so that people can engage and they understand.
Thank you. I can't take another contribution, Chris. I really can't. I'm going to take another question. Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. And just a huge thanks to everyone who's spoken tonight. I mean, it's been extraordinary to listen to what you've had to say. And I mean, I'm a relatively new councillor. I'm horrified to hear what you've been talking about. I mean, obviously, I've had some experience of it through casework that I've done myself and through residents I've been engaging with in my own ward. But this has really been a roller coaster of dissatisfaction. So, I mean, I'm really sorry to hear about the experiences you've gone through. And I think the contrast between this discussion and the last one is just incredibly stark. So, and I think it is important to understand these problems. And I get that we as a commission want to focus on positives and how we might move forward. But I think in order to do that, we do need to understand the problems. So thank you for telling us about that.
Can I ask if you have a question, Councillor Watson, please?
I've actually got 3. I think, I mean, one of the first question is, could we create space to have this conversation properly? Because I don't think we've had the conversation properly this evening. Could we hold a joint session with the Housing Committee? Because most of these issues are not within our competence, I don't believe, as the committees to answer.
So
and the final question,
Councillor Watson, what I'd like to do, so obviously this is the forum that we have here and now. I think we're all aware that there is a tremendous piece of work that needs to go on. So what I'd like you to do, please, here and now, is focus on any questions that you wish to ask of the individuals before us, and then we can have a discussion, which I'm really very, very happy obviously to take up with members afterwards, about how to take this particular piece of work forward. Obviously that is something that is very necessary, but if you could focus please on any questions that you'd like to gain information from the people present, please.
so I would ask John, what role does he think that this residence quality network that you mentioned and the assessment that you think will be done, is that a way of helping the council to navigate some of the challenges that have been presented today, and might that create a constructive framework through which to maybe make some progress? And then resident groups present, what in your view would constitute better communication from the council on some of these issues?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I'm afraid I'm going to have to be very brutal and say that I've got another 5 minutes for this item, and then we're going to have to move on with the rest of the meeting. So I extend that offer to further this discussion. Hopefully after the taster this evening, we'll be in a position where it will be possible to get you together afterwards, which is what I would have liked to have done earlier. But I'd like to sort of focus on drawing this to an end now, please.
So shall I proceed with the response?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Essentially, what it came across, well, at least I hope it came across from the presentation, was the term co-creation. And I know this is something that does need in itself to be pinned down, but in a sense, whether we like it or not, we have to review a certain amount of what we do in the light of statutory requirement. Basically, we have to develop a menu of involvement options for residents in a co-created fashion. So there's a window of opportunity here to look at the pros and cons of different ways of engaging with residents, what works best in what situation, circumstances. And basically, in that sense, there's a certain amount of going back to the drawing board because we have to co-create the menu of options with residents. So, Councillor, sorry, I didn't get your surname, and I apologise for that. Councillor Neil, was it?
Councillor Watson.
Sorry, Councillor Watson. Sorry, apologies for that. I don't know if that answers one of your, because you bundled up a few questions there. I don't know if that addresses one of the questions you were asking.
Thank you. Were there other comments? Councillor Merrill, did you want to come in as well?
Just want to, the Housing Quality Network, our consultant firm that we brought in to look at what we need to do to reach the Social Housing Act regulations and what recommendations they will put forward. That will obviously then go into the housing participation work we're doing, which will then be consulted to the wider residents as well. So there's still a lot of work to be done through that. That's not the dead end of it. That's more of looking at, are we ready? Most probably the answer is no. What do we need to do to be ready? And they're the kind of the consultant experts in looking at it from a policy framework perspective, not from a residents-led perspective, if you know what I'm trying to say there. We'll look at our policies, make sure they're in place, and we'll discuss those with residents to see if they fit with residents' requirements.
Thank you. Nat, did you want to come in as?
Yeah, just to add, Chair, that at present now, we are requiring all our officers to actually meet 100 residents and actually talk to them about how they can get involved. And it's like a door-to-door knocking and speaking to them basically. And so far, so good. The responses we are having are overwhelming. In addition to that, each officer now is going to co-create 4 community events with their own TRAs, so to try and make sure people come out and talk about team events. And in the process of eating, drinking, and having a chat, we can get a glean of really what people want for true representation. So if we do about 4 events each, that you're looking at 28 events borough-wide, and about 700 conversations going along the way, hopefully we'll begin to relate better to our residents and create better relationships with them and get to understand exactly what their priorities and aspirations are.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to, at this stage, if Chris, if you want to make a closing comment, what I'm going to, as you know from the agenda, we've got a whole additional element of the agenda to go still. So what I would like to do is encourage you, please, to sort of engage with me after this process, so we can actually set up an appropriate forum to take this work forward. But if you have a closing comment, thank you, Chris.
It's not really a closing comment. It's just in answer to the previous question. One of the frustrations that we have when we're dealing with our housing issues is we can't find our way around the council. We can't find our officers. I don't know how to get hold of our housing manager. And when people ask the questions, no one can give us a breakdown of who the staff are in various areas and how we can locate them. Very, very simple remedy that would take away some of the frustrations that we have.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid, I mean, thank you so much for everybody who's participated in this item. I'm going to have a quick comfort break for 5 minutes. I am very conscious that it's been quite difficult for some people, but I would like to take it forward anyway. Thank you. Can I ask members to come back to the table, please, because we need to move on with the meeting. Could members come back to the table, please? Right, I'm going to have to move on.
David and Chris, maybe
Chris. Right, we're going to move on with the rest of the meeting, which I apologise, and well, thanks to everybody who has stayed the distance, and apologise that it has taken so long to get to this point in the meeting. I'm very, very grateful to officers for hanging around this long, in particular, specifically to Juliet, who I know is speaking to us very kindly from her sickbed, and also to Tom Vosper if he has managed to stay with us. I can see him in name only. Lovely, thank you. Where are we? So moving on to item number 8, which is a review of financing and resourcing the climate emergency plan, an officer briefing. The briefings on low carbon heating and retrofit projects for council homes and on climate finance have been included in the papers. The following officers will present and take questions. We have Chris Page, who spoke to us earlier, is the Climate Change and Sustainability Director. Tom Vosper, who is the Strategic Project Manager. David Hodgson is is with us. Yes, sorry, I missed David earlier. Who's the Director of Asset Management, and Juliet Seymour, who is Planning Policy Manager. Chris, do you want to talk briefly to your paper? And then if Tom and David could present their paper briefly too. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. And I again, as with earlier, I will speak briefly because I suspect members don't want to be here all night, as interesting as this topic is. And the paper that I sent round in advance, I think, sets out briefly what's happening in this area. So in terms of Southwark Green Finance, Councillor Newlands and I met in advance to talk about what would be most useful for the committee. And I think one of the things that I understand that members would be interested in is what we're doing around Southwark Green Finance, which is a council plan commitment to find ways to help residents to invest in financial products that will that can invest in climate change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are on that, but also just to give you an overview of where we are in terms of finance generally as a council. Overall, we've done work which hopefully will be familiar to you all, looking at the cost of tackling the climate emergency in Southwark, and it comes to about £3.92 billion. So if the council used every penny it had for the next 10 years, we wouldn't come close to having the right amount of money to actually tackle the climate emergency in its entirety. So there's a huge funding gap. We're doing what we can, I think, with the resources that we have, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We're applying for grants when they're available, and I can talk a bit about that. But there is still, at the end of all of this, a huge need for government investment and long-term sustainable and predictable investment if we're serious about tackling the climate emergency. We're not going to solve it through using either our own resources or some of the funding pots that are available at the moment. We do need something else. So currently we are investing our own resources in tackling the climate emergency. We've got a £25 million capital fund, of which around 21 million is now allocated. We've got a £2 million climate reserve. We've got a £2 million decarbonisation fund, and we now have a permanent climate change team that's being resourced, all of which is about trying to use council resources effectively to tackle the climate emergency. The interesting thing for me, though, is actually the big carbon producing or the big areas where the council produces carbon are not particularly going to be tackled using that money. 80% of our emissions, or just over 80%, comes from procurement, comes from services that we buy in or goods that we buy in. So if we really want to tackle our own emissions as a council, we have to tackle how we procure and procure in a more sustainable way. So we're currently looking at that at the moment and starting some work on that. The next big emitter for us is buildings in the borough. How do we make our buildings greener and more energy efficient? So where we are bidding for money, we're using that money to try and decarbonise our own buildings. And the other thing that we're doing at the moment is trying to understand the impact of our budget overall on carbon emissions. So often there is focus on the changes that take place, as we've seen, as you'll see with the budget, I think coming to Council Assembly on Wednesday, but actually how we use the entirety of our budget. Are we using that in the most effective way? And we're making some changes internally to try and ensure we are. So decisions about budgets now have to have a climate change concurrence, so that decision makers are having to think about climate change in those. So some changes are happening which are really important. There are sources of income coming into the council as well as our own resources. So Southwark Green Finance I'll talk about in a moment, but there are big funds out there. Two biggest are the public sector decarbonisation fund and also the social housing decarbonisation fund. Two big government pots, national pots that councils can bid into to do work on their own estates, but their own operational estates, and also on social housing. And we have been successful in bids in the past for those and are continuing to put in bids for future works. There are other big funding pots out there, Green Heat Network being one where we've been successful, and other smaller pots from both the GLA and government. So we are bidding for things when we can. Final thing I was going to talk about was the Southwark Green Finance. So as I said in my opening remarks, there's a council plan commitment to introduce Southwark Green Finance. We're still in the process of mapping out what that looks like. In the council delivery plan, I think we're due to report on that at the end of this quarter. So we're still working on that as officers. But at the moment, what it's looking like is a number of boroughs have come up with some form of capital bond, which is a mechanism where residents can invest their own money into a bond, into a product, that money can then be used to do capital works to reduce carbon. The residents then get money back over a period of time with some interest. Lewisham have just launched one, £1 million bond, and other boroughs have been successful as well. We're looking at this really carefully and seeing if this is something that would work in Southwark. We have to consider the cost of delivery of that against the amount of money it can raise. That £1 million is quite modest in terms of an amount of money to raise, and so we have to look at the resource that goes in to producing that against the return we get. So we're looking at that at the moment and thinking really carefully about that before we come up with recommendations for cabinet. So that's a big piece of work we're doing at the moment. I'm really interested in the outcomes and the recommendations that will come from this committee, Chair, because I think the work you're doing on green finance will help hopefully inform that work, but also other ideas that come forward about how we could be bringing money in and finding innovative ways to bring money in. Because, as I said, we've got a lot of investment we're making ourselves. We're bidding for government money when it's available, but it's not going to come close. So looking for other ways. The bond is one, but if there are other ways as well, we'd be really interested to hear from this committee as well.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Tom to sort of briefly introduce his presentation, and then if Juliet has comments as well on. Sorry, thank you.
Good evening.
And David, sorry, I keep missing David. Sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think the paper that came to the committee has got a number of points. I think 1 to 5. So points sort of actually points 4 and 5 mainly relate to me. So Dave, I don't know if you want to go first and cover the first few points.
No, it's fine, Tom. In as Chris said, in the sort of like favouritism for brevity, really. I mean, we've set the report out, and we'll make the assumption that people have read through the report, and we're happy to sort of take questions, etc. But I think, to echo Chris's point, we're almost in a perfect storm, aren't we, in terms of the financial challenges that we're facing in this country at the moment in time. And I think it's worth recognising that the additional funding that we need as we move forward has to come from government. We're talking about sort of figures close to £1 billion to enable the council, if you like, to get to net zero on its housing stock alone. These are significant figures. We've also seen, obviously, caps on our rent. We've had CPI that was forecasted to hit 2% for 2022, hit 10.7%. What does that mean? Well, essentially what it means is that we've seen 20 to 30% increases on all build costs across the council. That's whether it's new build, maintenance, or measures that involve sort of, carbon savings, etc. So every aspect of it is going in the wrong direction for us. So those challenges are there, and never has it been more important, really, to get the message across in terms of trying to access funding, etc., which is what we're trying to do. We have a very limited resource, as Chris has identified, in asset management. We don't have a specific officer that deals with this. We've gone forward for funding. We've got acceptance for that from April this year, and we'll move that forward. So it comes to officers like Tom and myself to sort of do this in a sort of outside of normal working hours in most cases, trying to sort of like work on these. I think somebody alluded in the last section about grant access and the complications of it, and I absolutely echo that, and we find the same frustration. Often these things come in at the last minute requesting enormous amounts of data, and we're often fighting against the clock, if you like, to get things put in. But as you'll see from the paper, we've managed to get a couple of items in there. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, that's been delayed, but we are hoping to hear something imminently. We were hoping we'd get it even for this meeting. Equally on the eco funding, which is the eco 4 funding as well, we're hoping that sometime around sort of April as well this year we'll get some good feedback, or positive feedback on that. We've done lots of application work, so that's it on those bits. And Tom, just over to you on the last bit, on your bit.
Yeah, I think all I'd add to that really is that obviously it is a constant challenge applying for grants, but we're keeping our eyes very much open. As we were scanning back over the grants that we have applied for in the past, we've had a lot of successes over the last few years. that go through the funding that we got for the water source heat pump scheme, the funding that we've had in for the cell chip project, as well as revenue funding that we've had to pay for feasibility studies and a number of other things. We've got grants in, grant applications in right now that we're waiting to hear back. So I think it's worth saying that a huge amount has been done, but there's a huge amount further to go. And one of the challenges that we always face is when we get to the end of one project, people immediately say, what's coming next? And the answer is almost always, we have to be guided by what funding is actually available to steer which projects we can deliver in a way that's not just doesn't just pay for itself in terms of capital, but also in terms of the impacts that it has on residents. Obviously, one of the things that we looked at really carefully with the current water source heat pumps project was not just how we're going to pay for the heat pumps, but how much will the heat cost that comes from the heat pumps that will be on residents' heating bills, because we don't want to go and meet one policy objective of achieving net zero carbon, but disrupt another policy objective of tackling fuel poverty. So we've got to always keep those things in tension. And at the moment, we find ourselves in a position of having to almost create a new business model for heat pumps. So not just look at how can we pay for them, but how can we pay for them in a way that allows residents to get to have heating bills which have not gone up as a result of those heat pumps being installed. So lots of challenges, but lots of positives as well, that a lot has been achieved so far, and we're pushing on to deliver more.
Thank you very much. Juliet, did you want to come in?
Just on the planning side of things, we've been bringing in new ways of residents saving money, because we've got fast track ways of helping green planning applications now. And we've got new online tools on our website that people can use that make understanding the processes and carrying them out a lot quicker. And for some of the green works, you don't need planning permission, and you can just get a certificate, or you don't need anything at all. And that's all very clear now. You can just put your postcode in on our website and it will tell you whether you need planning permission or not for your property. So that's been really successful. We're getting hundreds of hits on those websites at the moment, and we're going to do more publicity on that. And from the carbon offset fund, we're looking at how much we should be charging for payments when 100% of the offsetting equipment isn't on site. And that's all part of our review that we're doing at the moment, that we'll be bringing back to you and bringing forward to Cabinet as well to take through as amendments to the Southwark plan. That work's going on at the moment, but it's very much in a sort of research and development stage. And also we're working with 19 other London boroughs looking at the evidence base behind the carbon offsetting policy and what information we can all put together as a group along with the GLA. So there's lots of work coming your way, but it's not all finished at the moment.
Thank you. Do members have any questions, please? Shalaka.
Thanks. I just had a couple of questions. First one, super easy probably, but you mentioned procurement was responsible for 80% of the emissions. What are like some examples of that? Because maybe I'm just not familiar with what that would mean.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we did an assessment of our overall emissions, and we looked at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 1 are basically emissions that you're producing yourself in the borough. Scope 2 are where the emissions are produced elsewhere, but you're using the energy. And scope 3 are where the emissions are created elsewhere. So most of the stuff that we procure is being made elsewhere, and that's everything. That's from the computers we have in our buildings to services and things that we provide, and all of those things have a carbon emission. So when we're looking at the council's own emissions overall, we've estimated that yes, around 80% of them come from things that we buy as a borough, but also services that are provided within the borough where the emissions are happening elsewhere. We are looking, I met with a company just last week about this and looking at how we can better understand exactly that, where in the supply chain are those emissions and where we can cut them down. But it's something that's really, I think it's really interesting, because you look at emissions in this country, and we sort of say, oh, you know, we're bringing them down because we're, you know, we haven't got big, heavy coal-powered fire stations, but instead we're buying things from countries which are using big coal power stations. So the consumption of this country is leading to emissions. It's not leading to emissions in this country, but it's still leading to global emissions. So we're trying to be as open as we can by saying, actually, we can't just move our emissions overseas and pretend it's nothing to do with us. We've got to take account of those as well.
Thanks. No, that's really helpful. And I'm assuming that would be a similar story for most boroughs in London. Yeah. And then the second question was around the sources of money, because you were just discussing, a couple of examples. Have you looked at partnering with any private companies or private organizations like local fintechs that would offer simpler financial instruments, or even matching schemes with larger companies or anything like that as more of a creative source of financing?
Colleagues may come in and tell me I'm wrong, but in terms of, to my knowledge, no. We are partnering with organisations in terms of bidding for grants and things. So at the moment we're doing some work. We've got funding through about 3 different universities where they're carrying out work, and we've been their partner in that, which has enabled them to access funding that's being spent on research that's been done in the borough. We're also working with London councils who are trying to look at how we work with the private sector across the whole of London. Because what we don't want to do is create a situation where you've got every borough effectively competing with each other. So we're looking at collectively, are there ways that we can, I think you heard from 3CI recently, I think we're looking collectively at, are there ways of packaging up projects across London which make it attractive for private companies to invest in. So we're part of that. We put projects through to their pipeline that are sort of suggestions of the kinds of work that we could do. But we haven't got, as far as I'm aware, any sort of bilateral sort of private company relations. Would be totally open for it if it's the best way of bringing in money. I don't think we've got any sort of principled objection, but we haven't pursued that. I don't know if colleagues may have. Tom Vosper's raised his hand, so he might tell me that we are doing it in one area.
Yeah, please do come in.
We are partnering with Veolia for the Southwark project, so that is a sort of private finance initiative, if you like. So through the waste PFI that was procured, I think 2007-8, there's a long-term partnership between Southwark and Veolia where they invest a lot of money to develop the service and then deliver it. And as off the back of that, the initial Southwark heat network was set up, and that was basically fully funded by Veolia back in 2013-14, and then we purchased heat from them at a low cost, but part of the money that we pay them is effectively them paying back their capital cost. So that is a private finance initiative. And as we look to extend the Southwark network, we're trying to mirror that model, but also get some government grant in to make the economics work as well. So that's one example where we are partnering with the private sector to bring some money in. But outside of that, certainly in the heat network sector, we did some consultation with residents 2 or 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, where we posed the question to residents, would you like to see more ESCOs, energy service companies, private companies, buying into the council's heating assets so that leaseholders and tenants have to pay less for renewal of boiler plant, heat pumps, building investments of various kinds. And the general consensus from residents was no, they didn't really want to see that, because while they saw some benefit to it, they saw that there were also some risks that came with that approach. For example, lack of oversight and governance on an ESCO versus the ability of residents to contact their local councillors and say, well, you know, we've got a problem with our heating system. Please, can you sort it out? You lose that sort of direct course, that direct recourse if you go through some private finance initiatives. So there was concern raised to that. So there has been within the heat network strategy a couple of years ago a decision generally not to pursue private finance for council-owned assets such as heat networks. But we did say at the time there may be exceptions, such as where it really makes sense in the Southwark facility, because Veolia own that facility, and there's really not any other way of getting access to that low carbon, low cost heat without partnering with them. So we think in some instances, yes, it's the right thing to do. In other instances, there might be concerns that we want to avoid.
Thank you. Councillor Hickson, did you have a question?
Yeah, just two short questions. I mean, it's kind of building on what you were getting at, but specifically on the challenges of raising kind of private capital to support projects. So it sounds like partly there might have been a kind of a resident resistance or even ideological resistance to this, but also partly it sounds like sometimes the rate that you get through the public works standards board, I said that right, might be competitive. But yeah, I'm just wondering what the challenges are. Is it about really being able to provide the project at scale that a private investor would come in and provide you with that capital? Because as you said, we heard from 3CI and from the Green Finance Institute at the last commission, and they were talking about how they help councils kind of bring these projects together at that scale. And then the second point on the green bonds, it sounded again from our previous meeting where we heard that Manchester and other councils had done this, that there was a bit of a kind of on-ramp to getting these things to work. Like early on, it doesn't sound like the economics are all that good, and that the scale of the projects, as you say, the scale of the money that you could raise is all that good. But they talked about the additional benefits of resident engagement with these projects, and so I guess you would approach that less as a kind of, this is how we raise capital in the short term in the most effective way, and more in a kind of, this is how we're going to build resident engagement towards our net zero target by 2030.
Yes, I mean, on the second point first, you're absolutely right. That if we're looking at just interest rates, and that's our only consideration, then we can borrow at very competitive rates through the Public Works Loan Board. So we can do that. But actually, there are other benefits from the bonds, which is why we're really exploring them. I suppose in my comments, what I was trying to say, I suppose, is we're trying to understand that. We're trying to understand how the model could work, what the benefits are, and weigh that up against some of the other costs and things involved, and to try and understand whether it's really the right thing for us as a borough. But it's interesting now, there are a number of boroughs and councils that have done it, so there's quite a lot of information out there about how it's worked, and we'd hopefully learn from what others have done so if that is the route we wanted to take in Southwark, we would hopefully create a good product that raise the capital, but then also, as you say, Councillor, have those other benefits in terms of community engagement, community buy-in, and those sorts of things. So no, absolutely. In terms of so your first point was around the challenges of raising private capital. So I think, I mean, if I'm honest, we haven't been pursuing partnerships with private investors to pay for things in Southwark. So in terms of what are the barriers and what are the challenges, I think as an individual borough, we that's not what we've been focusing on. We've been focusing on trying to get the big grants in through government at the moment, and looking at this product. This was a council plan commitment, and then working through London councils to try and collectively work out the best way of taking this forward. So I don't think, yes, in terms of an individual borough's experience, I don't think we've come up against barriers, because it's not particularly something we've pursued. We've been thinking working through London councils as a more effective way of doing it. I think one of the challenges is always going to be that a lot of stuff that we do as a council is for public good, it's not for profit. So if you insulate a building and you reduce energy costs, the capital investment to insulate the building comes from us, but the saving goes to residents. So if you're a private investor, how do you create a way where the saving and the benefit goes to the investor so they get a return on their investment? And in a lot of public works, that's a really difficult thing to work through. Electric charging, we can put in huge electric charging infrastructure, but it's the drivers of electric vehicles that make the saving. So as an investor, how do you create something where they get a serious return on their investment? And I think that's something where we've been really keen to work with London councils and with 3CI to look at, for me, what I think is quite a big problem in the way, an investor wants a return. That's why they're investing. So, but as a council, that's not why we're investing. We're investing because it's for the public good, and we're using resources in a way to meet our commitments as a council. But that's different to someone who's wanting a return on investment in that way. So it's a challenge. I don't know what the answer is, but that's why we're working with London colleagues and with experts in this field to try and see if there is a way of doing it, because private investment, I think, has got to be part of the solution to this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, not directly, perhaps take a step back and before you hear my question. How much work has Southwark done in calculating the CO2 equivalent of the meat and dairy products which it purchases for care homes, for schools and for other places? So not directly about investment per se, but I wondered if Southwark is doing work to calculate the CO2 equivalent. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Councillor. So we haven't, so as part of working out our own emissions, we have looked, we had two companies who did this assessment for us, Anthesis and Carbon Descent, who did that analysis. They looked at, you know, what are the emissions of a council. Now, in doing that, there's quite a lot of generalisations you have to make in order to make the data meaningful. I don't know, if I'm honest, Councillor, whether they went to that level of emissions in terms of council's own procurement of animal products for its own buildings. I can look in and write to you into the committee if that's helpful. What I would say though is, as part of the climate strategy, it's, I'm sure you're aware that there is a section on food and the things we need to be doing to create more sustainable diets, and part of that is obviously reducing meat and dairy, and you know that's part of the work we're doing. But in terms of our own emissions, I'd have to write to the committee and let them know.
Thank you. Do members have further questions? Thank you. I was going to ask then quickly, and this is a topic which I know is very much under development, but we have, and I think Juliet has been working on this. We have the Carbon Offset Fund, which I'm conscious is potentially a major source of climate finance. And I'd really sort of accepting, of course, that I know this is sort of work in progress, but it'd be really useful to hear an update from you on how we can look sort of going forward, how we can expect for the Carbon Offset Fund to be allocated. And also if you could sort of say a few words about what we're actually charging in terms of carbon offsetting, and you know whether there are any possible potential to increase that, given that sort of for I think it's £95 a tonne, it's pretty difficult to save a tonne of carbon unless you're really going for the low-hanging fruit, and hopefully we're moving to the point where we would have done most of that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I think on the questions of whether it's the right rate and on the sort of, yes, the money we raise, I think that's probably a question for Juliet rather than me. But in terms of how we're going to allocate it and how we're spending it, so we set up the Green Buildings Fund last year, and in terms of trying to work out how to best use it, we piloted effectively internally first. So we've been looking for opportunities to spend it internally. Planning committee make decisions on that spend. So we've taken forward a proposal to them. I think there's 2 projects so far that have been funded through that. But as you say, it's got to meet some quite tight rules around carbon emissions. So the per tonne cost of carbon, the per tonne saving of carbon. So we've done that internally. We've had a couple of successful projects or projects that we're funding. This year we're looking at going to the public with it. So we are wanting to launch it as a programme that the public can bid for. We're working through the detail of that at the moment because there are some quite tight technical rules around it. What we don't want to do is put a fund out, raise expectation that anyone can bid for it and be successful, because there's a lot they have to do to demonstrate how they're saving carbon. So we want to make sure before we launch it to the public that the support is in place from officers and from the council to help people put together really credible bids for that money. So that's a piece of work we're on this year, and we wanted to launch that later this year. But on the technical questions around carbon, the cost of carbon, is probably one for Juliet, I think.
Yeah, so we're currently reviewing the cost of carbon. We brought in the cost of carbon that's being used across London at the moment because it was the most quickest way to increase cost of carbon from £60 to £95. So that's why we did it at that as an interim. So at the moment we're trying to work out exactly how much it costs to offset. And so that's all happening as part of the early review and also as part of the climate emergency SPD. There is other work going on though as well around the actual encouraging and ensuring that as much of the offset goes on site. So as that happens, we will get less payments, but there will be more on-site reduction. But at the moment, there's no technology in place that enables 100% of the carbon to be offset on site that we've seen yet in applications. So we do have the payments required. We've looked at other boroughs as well. We've been benchmarking, as I was saying earlier, we're working with 19 other London boroughs, looking at how much they charge. Different boroughs charge differently. Some of them do have higher amounts than us for different types of development. So we're reviewing those to see how that's worked and how that's gone, to learn from that for looking at what we should bring in Southwark. So that's work in progress at the moment. We don't have the final answer, but we will be bringing that back to you. Also looking at how we measure and making it easier for people to understand how it's all measured, so we can communicate it more clearly. So that's part of the London-wide work that we're doing as well at the moment.
Thank you very much. I think it's worth saying that obviously, because we have got to the point where we're very late in this meeting, and perhaps people have run out of energy a little bit, and I'm sure that's the case for me anyway. But if people do have additional questions that they would like to ask, if you could sort of if you could email me, and I'm sure that in terms of sort of putting together our final reports and recommendations, it would be great to sort of, you know, if people do have afterthoughts, and then they can come back to the next meeting. If there are any further members' questions, if no further members' questions, thank you very much. Thank you to Juliet, David, Tom, and Chris for staying with us so long, and welcome to Councillor McCash, who is joining us at 21:57. I don't know if, oh, Chris, if you want to, I don't know if you're going to. Thank you very much. So on to item number 9 of the meeting, which is an interview with the Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency and Sustainable Development. The Commission will now interview Councillor James McCash, who is providing maternity cover for Councillor Helen Dennis, Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency and Sustainable Development. The Cabinet portfolio was enclosed in the documents, and I think Councillor McCash is going to talk a little bit to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to see you all this evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you for putting me number 9 on the agenda, so I had the opportunity to listen to the rest of your meeting. That was a real privilege. So I'm going to run through the items that it identifies Councillor Dennis as being responsible for. As you can see, I'm not Councillor Dennis. I'm a poor imitation of Councillor Dennis, but nonetheless, I will do my best. All these items under the list, Councillor Dennis will be responsible for delivering our commitment to. These are all lines from the Council's delivery plan. So I'll talk about all of those. That is a delivery plan over the course of 4 years. So even though we're almost at the end of the first year, I'm afraid I have not delivered all of those things yet, but we're only a quarter of the way through. And as Councillor Nguyen's already said, so my cabinet portfolio, or Councillor Dennis's, and my cabinet portfolio covers climate emergency and sustainable development. I appreciate this is the Environment Scrutiny Commission, but I'm nonetheless going to talk about both aspects of that. So item 1, launch a land commission to identify how more land in Southwark can be freed up for the public good. So this is very much on track. We announced this 2 weeks ago. The first meeting of the commission is going to be happening next week. We pulled together, I think, a really exciting group of people to lead that commission, a combination of people from the local community, experts and economists in land and housing and so on in different areas, and landowners as well. So for instance, the Church of England and Transport for London. There's a huge amount I could say on this subject. I'm very happy to answer any questions, but I'll move on to the next item now. Second item is halve the council's carbon emissions again by 2026. This was a commitment that we had in 2018 through 2022, and we're now doing that again. This is operational emissions. So I think when we're talking about carbon emissions, we need to be clear on what exactly we're talking about. So we have a commitment to net zero for the whole borough by 2030, and that is scopes. I think we're aiming for scopes 1, 2, and 3, but that sounds quite challenging. But this one here for 2026 is scopes 1 and 2 for the council's emissions, and not just the council's emissions, but the council's operational emissions. So that doesn't include, for instance, housing. Our current target for the end of this year is actually to do some preparatory work on rebaselining. So as I think Chris Page already alluded to, the calculation of carbon can be quite complicated, and the council is constantly changing. So the big thing that's going to happen in the course of this year is we're insourcing our leisure provision, and that's going to dramatically increase the amount of carbon that the council is responsible for. It doesn't mean that more carbon is going to the atmosphere. Essentially moving things from everyone active to our books doesn't change the impact on the climate, but it nonetheless changes quite dramatically how we account for that. So we're going to have a increase in carbon emissions, which we're then going to bring down again. So it's going to be a lot more ambitious than it was last time. That's item 18A if you're looking at the council delivery plan. The next item is launch Southwark Green Finance. So that's been covered in some detail already in your last item. Very much looking forward to hearing the report, reading the report from the Scrutiny Commission, and that shaping our work on that topic. I thought the discussion there, obviously there's a number of aspects to green finance. There's things like public bonds in terms of borrowing, etc., in terms of applying for grants. But I thought the aspect about private sector investment is particularly interesting, because it does strike me that essentially there is, as of yet, not a great enough return on private sector investment at the same time as when we can access quite a good return from the Public Works Loans Board. So I think that raises questions over the extent to which the profit motive is able to tackle climate change and capitalism. The jury's out on that one. Next item is stronger planning rules to make sure all new developments meet high green standards. So this item is actually very similar to another item but further down. This one refers to in fact, it refers to the one after, sorry. This one is about our review of our planning policies. So we're due to have an informal consultation on the early review on the Southwark plan for climate emergency in about 12 months' time. There will also be, in tandem to that, a supplementary planning document that sits underneath that on climate emergency as well. So that the kind of consultation on that will begin in the next 12 months. There'll be opportunity to shape that, and some of the discussions that you just had about things like the carbon accounting for the offset fund. Those are the kind of things that will be covered. Also looking at things that came out of the last year's environmental scrutiny review, and energy, for instance, is going to be covered in that as well. The next item is streamlined planning applications for new and retrofit projects that meet high green standards. This refers to major and strategic applications, and Juliet also mentioned that a moment ago as well. So we've offered a policy surgery, where we offer advice and kind of do reporting and so on for these major applications to ensure that we're doing best that we can in terms of carbon reduction. This has been pretty successful. We've received quite a few queries. We received 27 queries on this in the latter half of 2022. So that seems to suggest that there's a lot of interest in it. And the next item is building the work of the Southwark Climate Change Citizen Jury. So the cabinet issued a response to the climate change citizens jury back in July. 88% of those recommendations were accepted. That is quite considerably higher than most citizen juries elsewhere, and very, very positive. And that's been now fully integrated into our climate emergency strategy. The following item now: use our planning policies to robustly require social rent homes. I'm sure we all know our planning policy requires 25% of habitable rooms to be of social rent in any application. You'll be delighted to hear, no doubt, that in the first quarter of this year, we doubled that at 50%. The second quarter, we exceeded it at 28%. And this most recent quarter 3, is almost 3 times that figure at 63%. That's 973 social rooms approved through our planning process in the last 9 months. Next item is backing local people to establish community land trusts, housing cooperatives and partnerships. It's a bit of a longer term project. We need to identify sites where we could potentially do some of this work, and also partners in the community to work within it. And some of the governance arrangements around that can be quite difficult. But we've set a target for ourselves by the end of this year to identify some sites and partners, and I think we're on track for that. I'm getting near to the end. The next item is establish a free green homes advice service for homeowners to help you make your home greener and lower carbon. I've been waiting for some time to find an appropriate moment to announce this, and here it is. It's 10:05 at over 3 hours into the Environment Scrutiny Commission, but we are going to be launching that next week, colleagues. So that's something you heard it here first. Don't tell anyone about it; it's still embargoed. Next item: streamline planning applications to green your home. So there was a similar line a bit further up. You might be confused in the difference between those. The previous one was about major and strategic applications. Those are the very big ones of 50 homes or more. This one refers to very small applications for your own household. So we've introduced a service, an online service that makes it much faster, and we kind of prioritize within the officer team to prioritize those kinds of applications. And so there's a statutory requirement that planning applications of that size need to be processed within 56 days. We've set ourselves a target for the green applications processed within 42 days. So that's what, 2/3, 3/4 of 75%. We've had 90 applications and 100% of them have met that target. Next item, create a retrofit learning network to bring together experts to share information on the potential costs, available discounts and carbon savings from making your homes more environmentally friendly. To be honest, this year is really just about scoping, working out who the partners are for that, and we're looking to complete that by the end of Q4. And then the last item on here, actually the only one that's not on the council delivery plan, I don't think, which is deliver brand new parks at Canada Water and off the Old Kent Road. That hasn't happened this year. That's expected through the planning process. I've got no reason to think that won't happen, but it hasn't happened yet. I'm very happy to answer any questions, any of those items, or indeed anything else.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions? Councillor King.
I've got 2 questions. I'm not quite sure I'm going to get the words out in the right order now. So one question led on from the earlier discussion about the carbon offset payment that applicants pay if they don't reach the highest of standards in terms of policy at committee. So you can correct me as we go if I'm wrong. And we heard that that potentially provides us with quite a lot of revenue in terms of being, well, quite a lot of money to invest in other carbon saving projects. And it feels, to make a comparison, it feels a little bit like when providing social rented homes off-site was an okay thing to do, and something that I feel that politically the authority has moved a very, very long way away from over, say, the last 15 years. And I suppose the question is therefore leading, but it's, do you have a view on where you think whether that carbon offsetting should be on site, ideally, or whether it's okay to be off site? I haven't asked that very sophisticated, but I suppose the bit is we're probably on a journey somewhere in that in terms of technology as well. But I suppose it's wanting to understand what is the ethos of the local authority when talking to applicants about what the solution is. And then you're right if I do 2. They're totally unrelated.
Do go ahead.
Was in terms of using our planning powers to robustly require new social rented homes, what are the biggest challenges to that at the moment? And how much of those challenges were started by Liz Truss's mini budget?
So I'll answer them in order. So in terms of the carbon offset fund, I think the analogy with social rent is an interesting one, but I'm not sure it's quite the same. And the reason why I think it's not quite the same is twofold. Firstly, I don't believe that it is impossible for developers to build social rented homes in their developments. I think sometimes it is impossible to meet our standards for carbon. So that's one difference. And I think the other difference is the experience of residents essentially what we want to move away from, I suppose, is kind of segregated housing in that sense. And that's why we don't accept it on site, except in social rented housing off-site, except in rare circumstances. I think the difference with this, actually, if you have a new development that's being built that doesn't meet our standards, and therefore we can take that money and we can put it into council housing for people who are of lower incomes, then I'm not necessarily sure that is worse for those for our kind of low income residents than putting it into the market rent. Putting higher standards of carbon savings in the market rent. I'm not sure. I think you're right about the technology. The technology will improve, and I think we'll probably see less and less of this as time goes on, although I'm not sure that's about to happen anytime soon. It could do. But I think that it's for me, I guess I'm still unsure. I'm still unsure to what extent what the balance is. What I do know though is at the moment, even if we did say to developers we want the carbon offset but not to be used at all, I don't think that would be possible at this stage. The technology just doesn't seem to be there, and I don't think that's happening. It's happening in a number of small sites across London, but it's not happening at scale anywhere as far as I know. Second item, challenge social rented housing. So I mean, a lot of it is from Liz Truss, absolutely. So as I'm sure people will be aware, obviously inflation is very, very high. Inflation in building costs is considerably higher than the general rate of inflation. So at one point steel was up by 75%. At one point shipping of kind of large materials was up 10 times. Obviously that was a very short period, but that nonetheless kind of created quite a lot of havoc. If you look at planning committee agendas for recently and upcoming, you'll notice that very, very few of them are for housing. And that's not social rented housing, but that's just housing in general. And I think at the moment the market for housing is very, very challenging. So there's a bit of a wobble in terms of costs, in terms of sale prices, which I think is largely linked to interest rates and access to mortgages. And at the same time, you've got, so that's kind of your demand side pressure, and then you've got your supply side pressure as well in terms of building costs. That's having massive repercussions through to us in terms of our ability to deliver on our housing targets and specifically our social rented housing targets. That said, the figures I kind of gave you there were largely from schemes that have been in train for some time, and that's why those kind of figures I think are pretty good. And some of those examples of where, you know, I think just to remind you, to policy for 25, and in these 3 quarters, we've got 50, 28, 63, considerably higher. And in part, that is because like an unexpected positive implication from this is that when developers are thinking, oh, actually, we can't sell these at the value that we expected, they maybe put more of them into an RP instead to a registered provider. So we are seeing some schemes delivering a higher degree of social housing than was consented at planning committee.
Thank you, Councillor Papula. Sorry.
That's fine, Chair. Cheers. I've got 2, maybe 3 questions. My first one is that it's a great thing that there's a target to cut down the council's operational emissions, but it would also be quite good to hear if there's any low hanging fruit in terms of retrofitting in general. So a level of partial retrofit which will cut down the council emission in terms of their housing stock. My next question is, what's your personal take on PFIs in the absence of of finance and guidance from central government? Would you be open to it, or of course working with partner councils to ensure that's implemented? And my third one is, what I've seen in planning committee is that schemes are advertised as net zero or close to it, but it fails to take into consideration embedded carbon, and that rarely is mentioned when it does come to planning committee. So I think in terms of this, it's kind of two-pronged. First and foremost, do you believe that that information like that should be made clearer to members of planning committee, that a scheme isn't completely net zero, it's net zero in terms of a certain scope of facts, but it's not truly net zero? And secondly, do you believe that the council should create some sort of scheme or guidance to ensure that first and foremost retrofit is put first rather than demolishing a building, to ensure that we are a very green council, that we do proactively practice what we preach and impose it on those that want to build in our borough? Thank you.
And can I just intervene slightly and say that Councillor Papulov's question very much speaks also to some of the recommendations from last year's Environment Scrutiny Commission. So that was very well raised, and it would be great to hear from you, Councillor McCash.
Thanks. I'll take them in opposite order. So in terms of the embedded carbon and net zero, so the first thing to say is this is something that will be considered as part of the earlier review that I mentioned earlier of the Southwark plan. So that's definitely a really key question to raise. I can't give you the answer to it yet because that's going to be part of that process. But I think that's something we should be taking very, very seriously. You kind of asked kind of two sub questions from that. Firstly, should clarity on embedded carbon be given to planning committee? My view is that planning committee should be given all the relevant and useful information in a clear and precise way, and I think that would be an example of something that should be shared where possible. These things are sometimes quite difficult to calculate, but where it is possible, I think we should be trying to provide that. And then in terms of guidance that we have, so in terms of retrofit of demolition, so we are both a planning authority and we are a developer ourselves, and I think our approach to development as a developer is that we do prioritise retrofit where we can over demolition. That's not always possible, and that does need to be balanced against other considerations. But that is our current approach, and I think that's the right approach. In terms of as a planning authority, we don't have the ability to rule out demolition on a private landowner's land. They have the right to do that, and that's not something we can prevent. But I think you're right. We do want to make it easier and more. And I guess we don't have a stick, but we kind of have a carrot, and that's kind of why we've kind of put those policies in place in terms of streamlining applications when they are doing green work and retrofitting. So PFI, I don't think in recent years we've entered into any PFI contracts. I don't think there's any intention to anytime soon. We do have one very significant one, but that is kind of a legacy contract. So that's with Veolia. And there's lots of aspects of that contract that are very effective. I think that in general we've kind of moved away from doing private finance initiatives, and I've no desire to revisit that question. And the last point about the operational emissions, so yes, about the low-hanging fruit. I guess the truth be told, we've done the low-hanging fruit. So, for instance, this building here is very kind of carbon non-intensive. This does count towards our operational emissions. The things we're looking at now are things like, for instance, like our fleet. So, turning our fleet into electric vehicles, that'd be quite a significant investment and actually quite a low carbon saving. It might be that we do it anyway because of the advantages to having lots of cars driving around the borough saying we're green, we're Southwark Council. There's maybe kind of non-carbon advantages to that. Just to emphasize, operational emissions doesn't include our housing stock. So that is a huge part of our emissions overall. It's significantly bigger than our operational emissions, in fact, and retrofitting that does absolutely need to be a priority. It just doesn't sit under that particular headline.
So that question specifically was about our social homes, not the operational emissions. What low fruit is there in terms of trying to sort that out? Since, as you quite rightly mentioned, operational emissions is effectively dwarfed by the emissions created by our homes.
Yeah, so I guess low hanging is a relative term. I suppose it depends how high the tree is and how long your arms are. So we have done some things. So, for instance, we've installed some heat pumps on 3 estates, the names of which escape me. We are currently doing quite a big project on the Tustin estate, which is about retrofitting. That's actually, in fact, funded through the Green Buildings Fund, which aka the Carbon Offset Fund, and that was funded, in fact. Chris may nod or shake, but I think that was funded when the amount per saving was even lower than it is now. So yeah, so that kind of really hit very, very kind of high efficiency standards. It is nonetheless a huge amount of money that we're putting in to do that. And like, we can't just go and do that on every single estate. So in that sense, that's low hanging fruit because we've managed to work out a scheme that is very efficient in terms of pounds, in terms of cost per kiloton. But it's nonetheless a huge amount of money to do it. And it only really works because we're doing it at that kind of scale. If we're doing that one house for one house, that wouldn't really be possible. So, you know, there was never that low hanging fruit. Got some of the low hanging fruit. Is there more low hanging fruit? Well, as I say, that is very much relative, and it unfortunately does need to be juggled alongside our commitments to fire safety, our commitments to dealing with damp and mould and stuff as well, which are all part of the housing investment programme.
Thank you. Do members have any further questions for the Cabinet member? No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Apologies, it's a rather late finish. We haven't quite finished the meeting yet, so if you bear with me just for another couple of minutes. But thank you very much to Councillor McCash and Chris Page for joining us. Thank you. Good night. So moving on, with the last item on the agenda is the work programme. I'm not going to suggest that we discuss that in depth at this point in time. I was going to sort of, probably a little bit off script. Obviously, we've had, and my apologies also to Shalaka, who clearly has joined us for the climate finance element, but obviously was also had the good fortune to witness the other section of the meeting as well. I would very much welcome suggestions from members about how to approach what further action we should take on the community engagement issues that were raised earlier. I think obviously I would like to highlight to you once again that both Julie and it is a matter of record, the number of email exchanges that we have had with some of the participants here this evening in order to try and arrange meetings prior to this session. Unfortunately, that was not successful. So I give that to you as a little bit of the context, but nevertheless, obviously, the ultimate aim is to try and move forward and bring about sort of, a more functional framework. That's what we want to do. So I would be very happy to, I don't know if you have a think about this, sleep on it. I can maybe have another sort of meeting online, sort of a discussion, a quick discussion at some point over the next few weeks. Sort of the next few weeks we'll be writing the report, so this will be something that sort of we want to incorporate. So in terms sort of formally, I say the work programme and cover report is enclosed, and also to report to you that I held an informal meeting with the London Bridge bid on early plans to provide a local carbon offset programme and potential partnership with the council. And I think Councillor Hickson, you're aware of that because I think some of the people who's there. It's in your ward. Yes, and I think Team London Bridge as well. I think sort of there's a certain discussion there that would be good to pursue as well. The three reports coming to the next meeting will be on climate emergency finance, sustainable freight review, and the residents' participation framework. And an informal meeting will need to take place in any case to discuss headline recommendations. So I'll leave that with you. Does anyone have any comments? Councillor Neil.
Yeah, I wonder if Catherine knows the council, the cabinet member for Leisure Park Streets and Clean Air, by her invitation.
So that's pending us finalising the final meeting, which now can't be on the 24th of April. So once we confirm that, hopefully it will be on the 2nd of May, if that's convenient and there's a room, then she'll be invited.
Thanks. I wouldn't want to decline the opportunity.
To be clear, we're going to have to change the date of the next meeting because Overview and Scrutiny wants to use that slot instead. So yes, that's why we will be finding another slot. Councillor King.
Yeah, a quick question. So in terms of the resident involvement piece, it obviously came to us because we are community engagement, but they were asking why it hadn't gone to housing as a scrutiny commission. I'm not suggesting I need all this information right now, but it would be useful to understand why it didn't go to housing if they had requested it. It's quite helpful to understand how it ended up with us today, if that makes sense, and why it didn't go to housing, because it felt like some members definitely wanted to be at housing, or whether we decided resident involvement was community engagement, because basically we ended up having some conversation about the definition of the two.
I think unfortunately, so the way this has landed with this commission is because it's about distribution of workloads, and it was felt that it would be appropriate to take that piece off housing because there are lots of other things. Housing obviously is a huge area, and there were lots of other things to consider in that pot, and therefore the community engagement element. Sorry, Evident, did you want to come in on this as well?
The reason why it has
I mean, I think the point is that it was to give, and I think, you know, yes. So this was a discussion that we had at the beginning of the year about how to divide up the responsibilities of the differing commissions. So that's how we ended up where it had been housing and community engagement, and instead we ended up with environment and community engagement. So that's the background. Yep. But I think what I would emphasise is that it you know, it was always called, as Everton also has outlined, it was always called community engagement. So that community engagement has moved from housing to environment and community engagement. That's yes, yeah. It was. I think what I'd like to really emphasise is that it was always sort of this separate chunk anyway.
My struggle is that some of the things I heard this evening make me want to make recommendations as a commission, which I think are probably housing recommendations rather than community engagement recommendations. So maybe the thing that would really help me is whether that can be whether someone could check whether that's possible.
So just
or not.
Here, so if you want if you wanted to make a recommendation here tonight that's come out of this discussion, and you think if we're talking about the resident participation framework, some of the recommendations also relate to housing, that's fine. Okay. You're free to do that. Your remit is really quite broad, and the reality is that things interrelate with other things, and so you can write a report to cabinet. So that's all good.
Can I ask, I mean, how members like to take this forward? Do you want to have should we have another meeting, which we could have? I'm thinking in terms of sort of an online discussion that we could have as members. I at the end of the meeting here, I said to Chris and the members and the residents who came along with Chris that equally, obviously, very, very happy to talk to them as well. I mean, I think, you know, I am certainly at your disposal and at residents' disposal to try and move this on. So I'd really be very pleased to hear from you. And again, if you have thoughts now, or if you want to come back to me over the next couple of days, then please do so. If are there any further comments now?
I mean, I guess just in terms, like, the main point I was hearing from them was around the lack of ability to make decisions. Like, we had a big debate about participation, and that's clear, right? But and then the new framework was to increase kind of participation and diversity, but at the core of it was about them being listened to and them being able to influence decisions. And so, in answer to your question, I guess I'm wondering, as a new councillor, you know, where you know, who makes the decisions and what decisions they can make. And so the answer would be, you know, do we need to have a dialogue with Darren?
Of course, and I think, again, I would say that this is up to us to make recommendations. So I think it's obviously not, it's something which is so big that we don't have the capacity to resolve it through this commission, but it's about making recommendations on how we move forward. And we, I mean, if we could have a meeting with Darren as well, but it is about sort of ultimately coming forward with recommendations. Councillor Pula.
But for us to come up with a recommendation with regards to that specifically, we need to have the knowledge and facts, and right now we unfortunately don't. So I do believe that if we are going to make any recommendations with regards to the matters that we've heard tonight quite powerfully from the residents, we do need to speak to Darren and get further clarification as to where power truly lies.
I'm very, very happy to try and arrange that. As I say, I suppose I'm saying, I don't think it's practical for us to think in terms of this commission coming up with a string of recommendations that are going to solve the problem. So I wouldn't be too sort of hung up on us having to do that. I think what we need to do is make recommendations on how it can move, how we can move it forward. So very obviously, yeah, absolutely, we should talk to Councillor Darren Merrill about it, but just sort of to try and, so we're not so concerned about sort of about the obviously quite daunting task before us on this, that we need to break it down to bite-sized chunks also and do what is practical, what we can practically achieve on the basis of the information that we have, to try and move it forward constructively. We won't have all the answers. Yeah. Any further comments? I'm very happy to discuss further sort of outside this meeting. Thank you very much, and good night.